Hey guys, welcome to part 9 of What If Naruto Was Trained by Anko. If you enjoy the video, then like, share and subscribe, and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and also check out my other playlist, hope you would like them too. So let's get started. Chapter 25. Hokage. The fire of the shadow illuminates the village. It took all of her willpower to pass between the familiar green gates of the village, a village she had sworn never to come back to if she could help it. It was a village filled with painful memories, memories she had tried desperately to forget. It had proved futile, however, since she always had the niece of her dead lover at her side. Shizune was a constant reminder to Tsunade that she had failed her precious people. That her lover had died in the field, his blood on her hands and face. It was a wound that she could never close because of Shizune, and though part of Tsunade hated her, that the other part was thankful. Having it constantly reopened meant she could never forget him and, by proxy, never forget her brother. Glancing at her former teammate, the biggest pervert she had ever met, she noted the pained look on his face. It took her a moment to realize that they were traveling down empty streets, places that held no bitter memories for her. Another moment was needed to figure out that to spare her the pain of remembering, he was torturing himself with this route. Hey, that schoolboy crush he had for her was still in effect apparently. Ever the gallant Freya. I made you a promise once, Freya said, giving her a look that made Tsunade's inside squirm uncomfortably. Tsunade looked away, remembering the last time she had felt like this. Part of her resented Freya for revealing that she still had people who could make her feel bad. Freya-sama, Shizune said hesitantly from behind them. Shouldn't we be heading to the hospital? I got a message, before we entered the village, Freya said somberly. It's best to head directly to the Hokage Tower. Tsunade arched an eyebrow, then realized what that meant, and part of her still surviving heart died just a little more. He's dead, isn't he? Come on, Freya said by way of reply. Minutes later, they entered the somber tower. Tsunade noticed the looks they garnered, but brushed it off. Her mind and heart were in turmoil at the moment, and all that mattered was whatever final business the old man had for her to deal with. A minute later, as they reached the hallway to the Hokage's office, she blinked at the feminine voice echoing from inside. And after I cut them off, I'm going to shove them down your fucking throat. What the hell? You're the one that freaking never told me I was a tune-in. A male voice shouted back just as angrily. As Tsunade entered the room, she found a dark-haired woman wearing a long trench coat shaking an orange and blue figure with wild blonde hair. I should have killed you in Kusa. The woman screeched, shaking him even more violently. Well, you didn't, and if you try it now I'll kill you, you pyskatic bitch. The boy screeched back, obviously unintimidated. Anko, he does has a point minus, the familiar genius student of the Yondem said from behind the Hokage's desk. You stay the hell out of this. Anko snapped, making the masked ninja cringe. I missed something, didn't I? Freya said, speaking up for the first time. Yeah. Anko shouted, rounding on him as she tossed the blonde boy away from her. That little prick decided minus wait, is that Tsunade-sama? Yeah, Vairia said, blinking. You actually found her. What, was she working off her gambling debt in a brothel or something? Tsunade. Brothel. Freya said, sounding wistful. Ahem. Kakashi said, standing up and attempting to assume command over the office. I think this can wait. We has other business to discuss. Oh no, don't mind me, Tsunade said with a snort. After all, you only sent the world's biggest pervert to drag me back to a village I loathe with a white-hot passion to save a sensei who died before we even got in the gates. Sighing, Kakashi sat back down, eye dropping slightly. So, I suppose offering you the job of Hokage is out of question. Let me see, Tsunade drawled sarcastically. Do I want a job that has 100% death rate? Hell no, if that's it, I'm leaving now. Tsunade-sama, Konoha needs your strength, Kakashi said, anxiously rising slightly. What Konoha needs, Tsunade said, fixing him with her glare, is to realize that no matter what pretty words they use, there will never be peace. Every Hokage has been a fool for risking their lives stupidly for an impossible dream. Tsunade-sama, you encouraged the Yondem, Kakashi said, sounding reproachful. Surely you couldn't have changed so much in so little time. Age changes people, Freya offered, sounding bored and sometimes not to the better. Whatever, Tsunade snorted, crossing her arms. Being a Hokage is bullshit. No one but a fool would do it. Well, at least stay and take over the medical minus Kakashi tried to reason before a loud, irate voice interrupted him. Just let the bitch go. Blinking, Tsunade turned to stare at the blonde runt she had initially overlooked as just some random tune-in. For him to be speaking like that denoted a lot of confidence, and when no one started berating the boy, Tsunade realized there was more to him than just being a tune-in. Naruto, this is Tsunade, the legendary medic. Kakashi explained, instead of berated, even if she's not willing to be Hokage, we could use her to help bolster our medical care. Fuck that, Naruto said, glaring at Tsunade, arms crossed. I wouldn't want such a cold-hearted bitch in my village, Hokage or not. Saying all of that, I don't know or care why, but I want her out of my village. Hair. Arrogant little bastard, Tsunade remarked to Freya, who was palming his forehead, before focusing on the blonde. What the hell do you think you're doing talking? This isn't any of your bizzin minus. Oi, like hell it ain't. Naruto shouted, stalking up to her, head craning back to stare at her. I, more than anything, want to receive the Hokage name. So this damn well is my business. So, get the fuck out of my village before I kick your goddamn ass. Tsunade opened her mouth prepared to thump the little bastard with her finger and rip his head off. But that look, the sheer determination, it made her hesitate. It struck her hard, reminding her painfully of two others. She could see a reflection of Danne and of Nawaki, and it felt like a shard of glass dug itself deeper into her heart. She wasn't sure how long she stood there, staring at him, but suddenly she realized he was gone and everyone was staring at her. Looking at Freya, the only one she could stand to speak with, she raised an eyebrow. Who the fuck was that? Uzumaki Naruto. Freya was a legendary ninja. More than that, he was an expert on women. That was why he had gone to retrieve Tsunade, because only he could convince her to come back. Just like how it was only him that knew just how pissed off and confused Tsunade was now. Naruto had spoken up, told her the truth, and had done it in such a manner that had forcibly reminded the slug tamer of two ghosts in her past. Ghosts that she would never be able to banish, no matter how much sake she drowned herself in. Hence why he had settled himself into a chair while Shizune chased off after an irate Tsunade, and he had smiled at an irritated Anko as she realized Naruto had escaped her clutches. Now alone in the office with the masked man, the Sannin was feeling marginally better. It was no longer his burden to care for the village, his debts now almost entirely paid off. All that remained then was to make ensure the protection of Minato's son. Freya-sama, I need to minus Kakashi started to say before the Sannin interrupted him. I know the Sandame died this morning, but this place feels like it's got Uni as well as a Shinigami prowling the streets. Freya paused and gave Kakashi a pointed, knowing look that clearly ordered he be told the exact state of affairs. It's a very tricky thing to explain, Kakashi temporized before leaning back in his chair. Of course you know about unity and the state that's put us in. Well, we also has the subtle fact that one of our own, Uchiha Itachi, turned on us. He wiped out his whole clan, except to his younger brother, though there were rumors about another survivor, but they turned out false. Freya said with a slight nod, knowing that things had to be extremely bad for the village at the moment. But really, there's nothing to be too concerned about. Kakashi said in a falsely cheery tone. Kakashi, Freya snapped warningly, needing to know and not appreciating the way the man was trying to hold back information. You're like Sensor, always able to tell when I'm holding back information. Well, I did teach your Sensor, so it shouldn't be a big shock, Freya said with a wary smirk. Good point, Kakashi allowed, his shoulders sagging with the death of the Sandame village. Morale is at an all-time low. Our strength is severely depleted thanks to Itachi and the fact that he slaughtered his entire clan and numerous Unbu teams. Oh, and also thanks to Unity and its little soiree during the tune-in exams. Paranoia and distrust is running high between the various clans, regular forces and the governors. So basically, we're lucky none of the other villages has realized just how easy we'd be to annihilate right now. Exactly, Kakashi said with a slight nod, though at least then we'd has a common enemy to draw us all together again. Still, there's no avoiding the fact that our forces are compromised and nearly non-existent. Of the Unbu and Jonin lost during the Unity battle, those who died fighting against Unity easily outnumber the dead Unity members 5-1. Meaning that Unity effectively shrunk those Unbu and Jonin that you can trust, and then melted back into the crowd, so now you has no way of knowing who is who. Exactly, and with the numbers shrunk, along with now being the official Hokage, I have to appoint new people to key positions and I'm risking the chance that they're Unity. Kakashi shook his head, reaching up to run a hand through his hair. The military police is under the control of the Hyuga, aided by the Inuzuka, so at least there's that. Still, you has a black ops force you can't entirely trust. Kakashi nodded, looking at him in almost desperation. I has no idea what or where this could be heading, and I can't completely trust a military police weaker than ever ran by a tune-in, having to bolster our ranks by promotions that are too early, and then lowering the graduation aid to the academy to increase our genin numbers. Hey, the more things change the more they stay the same. Freya mused, staring off into the distance, silently remembering back during his childhood. Back when the minimum graduation age for the academy had been 13, only to change to 10 as war broke out. Freya-sama, please, Kakashi said, drawing the toad hermit from his brief trip into the past. I don't have the energy to be the leader our people will look up to. If Tsunade-sama won't do it, please take the title of Hokage and lead us. The Sanin stared at the man, and admittedly, he was tempted to take the offer. His dream at one point had been to be Hokage despite Tsunade and Orochimaru's ridicule. As Hokage he could do a lot of good. He could also enact a law that required all hot kunoichi to wear bikinis at all times, but ultimately he rejected the idea. He was too old, too faded. He trained Hokages, but he could never be one himself. The bitter truth about being a Hokage was not for him, and he knew it. Sighing heavily, the Sanin heaved himself up, and then shook his head. I've been out of the scene for too long. The people need a leader they already know. One that they trust. Freya paused, a small grin on his face. For better or worse, you're the goddamn Hokage now. But do you has any idea how hard it is to get 5 minutes alone to read my precious Ikarika? If you think that's bad, Freya shot back breezily, imagine me trying to get 5 minutes alone to write your precious. Oh, maybe this is the best after all. Azumaki Naruto was not a perfectionist, nor was he obsessive. However, he was determined to be better, determined to be Hokage. Hence, he was now in a slightly remote training area, practicing the moves Anko had taught him as well as other things that he was creating on his own. Mostly though he was trying to figure out how to silence his movements. Without even looking at the post, or moving his body, Naruto struck, driving his kunai as far into the post as humanly possible. Producing another one, he twirled it and then struck again, moving beyond the basic move into a more advanced strike. He struck repeatedly, advancing each level as he went, unable to rationalize how the style was flawed. He knew he was moving without telegraphing, without looking at where he wanted to strike. The only real had to be the noise he made as he moved, but he couldn't even hear it, so he had no clue how to fix it. Sweating, he paused, frowning, as he stared at the training post riddled with bladed weapons. Then feeling someone approaching from behind, he turned to find the buxom woman from the Hokage's office behind him, and he couldn't help but glance at the cleavers on display. Shaking that off, he looked up at her, scowling. What do you want? Oh, nothing much, Tsunade said lightly. She offered Naruto a smile that he recognized as insincere from the start. You just impressed me earlier with all your talk. I just had a couple questions, really. Like I care, Naruto muttered, turning back to his post and eyeing the worn wood. Do you know, she started, her voice soft, capturing his attention, what it means to be Hokage? At this, Naruto stiffened and slowly turned back to face the older woman. With a voice as serious as sharpened steel, he replied, yeah. I know. Then maybe you also know, it's pretty much suicide, Tsunade said, with a nasty sneer. You look pretty dim, but I didn't think you'd be stupid, kid. Then again, Yondem was a genius shinobi, and look how foolish he turned out to be. The Yondem was the greatest Hokage. Naruto retorted angrily, flexing his hands. Whatever personal resentment he held to his dad, the Yondem had been a great Hokage. Oh, you're right. He was the greatest Hokage, Tsunade retorted waspishly. Out of all of them, he's the only one that didn't leave a family member behind. He didn't leave a wife or a sister, or a grandchild or a niece to cry and deal with his self-righteous selfish desire to be a hero. You have Naruto grated out, walking toward her slowly, no idea what Arashi left behind. Arashi. Tsunade repeated blankly, before a knowing look flashed in her eyes. Oh, is that it? You think, just because you two look alike, that you're related? Knowing Freya, he's let you believe that too, hasn't he? My dad died killing the fucking QB, Naruto shouted angrily. He gave everything to save this village. Every Hokage has. I will too. Because this village gave me a chance. I was hated, loathed, Ostracized to the first 12 years of my fucking life, but they gave me a chance. This village let me grow up, despite the vast majority thinking I was a spy. I has a friend and family because of the chance they gave me. If I have to repay that chance with my blood, sweat, tears, or even my damn life, I will. Can you even hear yourself? Tsunade mocked. They gave me a chance, I'll repay that with my life. If you're expecting gratitude, you're an even bigger fool than the Yondem. Nobody cared, nobody. You got that chance because that stupid old man let his sentimentality get in the way. Do you really want to throw your life away for that? I will pay that price, Naruto growled, eyes narrowing dangerously, so that this village can give the same chance to someone else when they need it. I'm not a coward, and I won't disgrace my important people by running. I will make my life count for something just like the Billy Goat, just like Arashi. You just don't get it. Tsunade snarled viciously. No matter what pretty words you use, that dream of yours is stupid and suicidal. I don't care, Naruto growled, slamming his fist into his hand, what you fucking say. Being Hokage is the greatest thing anyone can do. Insulting the Hokage is the same as insulting this village, the dreams, the precious people inside it. What will it take to make you realize that stupid little kids shouldn't joke about foolish dreams minus? Oi, what about you? Naruto said, cutting her off, his anger burning brighter by the second. What has you ever done in your miserable life that mattered? Did you even try to make your life count? Or did you just run away the first chance you got? My life minus you can't even understand my life. I've lost more than you'll ever understand. Tsunade said, glaring at him. I've lost everyone precious to me, all because they believed in the same foolish dream. Oh, Naruto said, looking down before looking up at her. So, you betrayed them. You ran away from them. Shut up. Tsunade growled menacingly. You don't has any right minus. Oi, I'm right, aren't I? You ran away from them. You made their lives count to nothing, you turned your back on them and the village that they loved. You're a coward. I said shut up. Tsunade shouted, tears beginning to form. I bet they're proud, ho. What were their names? Or has you forgotten that too? Naruto mocked, stomping closer. You coward. They must be rolling over in their graves minus. Shut up. Tsunade roared, cutting him off as the back of her hand slammed into the side of his head. Naruto's world exploded at the impact, his body hurtling through the air before he landed with a sickening crunch against the base of a tree. His mind reeled, trying to function despite the pain. He could taste blood, and suddenly his hurt cleared, and he regained his feet. With a roar, he charged the lost-looking woman, concentrating the chakra in one hand while striking with his other to form the ball of chakra. A moment later, his arm swept back with the Rasengan swirling in the palm of his hand. Take this, you bitch. Tsunade seemed to snap out of her stupor, surprise on her face, and then drove a single finger into the ground. The resulting splitting of the earth made Naruto stumbled and drove the Rasengan into the ground. A moment later, he went spinning backward from the force of the Rasengan to crash heavily into the ground. Wincing, he sat up, and then swore at the deep ravine that was now racing along the ground, just to his right. As he turned to shout at her, Tsunade's hand grasped his neck firmly and yanked him up. Struggling, he grasped at her hand, and then tried to punch her, only to have her slap him. Blinding pain exploded through his head once more, and Naruto couldn't help but scream that had been worse than any hit from Anko. Lashing out with a kick, he managed to connect with her chin, before suddenly being driven into the earth with a thump. His back arched at the impact, his body exploding with yet more pain. Coughing, he struggled to sit up, but realized he was pinned by the vice-like hand around his throat. Hokage is not something you, or anyone needs to be dreaming about. Kids has died, adults has died over the fucking dream of being Hokage. So. Naruto wheezed, wincing, as her hand spasmed and she lifted him once more to dangle in the air. It's a death sentence, Tsunade said evenly, dropping him contemptuously. Give it up, and be happy. Struggling his way to a crouch, Naruto coughed, surprised at how much his body was hurting, if almost felt, as if he had broken his bones. Looking up at her, he narrowed his eyes. Fuck you, Naruto panted, disturbed by the coppery taste of blood filling his mouth. Don't be a fool. Just give it up. Forget about being Hokage. Tsunade shouted, tears beading in the corners of her eyes. No matter how much you think you're different, you'll die. Why won't you realize that? Being Hokage, dreaming of being Hokage, is a death sentence. So what? I'm going to die someday. Anyway. I'd rather my life meant something. I'm not a coward. I won't run away, no matter what. You. Why won't you? Do you even understand what being Hokage will cost you? Tsunade asked, a sheer pain in her voice disturbing. Oi, I understand. Naruto managed, glaring at her. But, shouldn't you be asking yourself what running away, and being so cold is costing you? Tsunade stared at him, crying, and then stumbled back a few steps before turning quickly and leaving him there in the clearing. Naruto stared after her, utterly confused, then stood rubbing at his floor, wondering for a moment about what had happened. Then turning, he started practicing once more. Maybe he would talk to Anko later about this, well, after the woman had cooled off a bit more. And so a new leaf sprouts. Konohamaru wasn't sure what to feel at the moment, which was understandable really. They had just finished the long, drawn-out ceremony to honor his grandfather, and he was left, standing pretty much alone. Asuma had, after a few hollow words, moved off to speak with Kurenai while Mogi and Uden were off together, ignoring him. Soaked to the bone, Konohamaru stared at the rain-slicked picture of his grandfather in silence. He should say something, he supposed. But what was there to say? Hell, he hadn't even been able to see the old man before he died. How fair was that? Thankfully, it was still raining well, drizzling minus, which made the tears he couldn't stop invisible. The last thing he wanted or needed was people feeling sorry for him. Looking away from the picture and to the mountain high overhead, where he could see his grandfather's face, he felt a small spark of anger. Why had his grandpa died? He was the only real family Konohamaru had left, damn it. It wasn't fair, it just wasn't fair. Fighting back a slight sob, he turned to leave, but found his path blocked by someone. Craning his head back, he felt momentary surprise at seeing the blonde boy known as Naruto. He looked so serious, his black clothes adding an air of importance. The blonde looked down at him after a moment and tilted his head slightly. Konohamaru. And Naruto, Konohamaru managed, wondering why he felt more intimidated by this boy than normal. So, Naruto said after a moment, raising an eyebrow. I heard you got some ass kicking in a while back. Konohamaru blinked, put off by that. Everyone else had shouted at the idiocy of his actions. Uden and Mogi were treating him as if he had intentionally set out to get them hurt. Yeah, sorta, I guess. I mean, I tried. Naruto's lips twitched and he reached out to ruffle his hair. Oi, from what Anko said, you held up against an unbu for a minute. That's not bad for an academy brat, you know. Brat. Konohamaru repeated blankly, before glaring. As you know, I'm the best in my year. Hey, I guess that's impressive, but remember there's a difference between being first in school and being first in the field, Naruto intoned wryly. So, don't you normally have those two other brats hanging around? Konohamaru winced, then hesitantly explained the situation. About how his decision to fight that unbu had gotten them hurt, how they had told him they wanted nothing to do with him. It wasn't long after that he was talking about his own thoughts on the fight and how he had wished he could have done better. Naruto remained silent through everything he had to say, then blinked as he finally came to a stop. Konohamaru took a breath and let it out, feeling a bit better now that he had actually talked to someone. Glancing at the picture on the table once more, he looked back at the older ninja, intent on asking for some training, only to, as Naruto start talking. Your grandpa told me something once. I figure you should hear it too, Naruto said, then pausing stared up at the Hokage mountain in silence for a moment. Looking back at him, with a slightly pained expression on his face, Naruto reached out, putting his hand on his shoulder. See, we're all going to die sometime, and all we can do is protect everyone that's precious to us until then. Konohamaru blinked, then shifted uneasily. That had sounded rather bleak actually, but wise in a weird sort of way. Sorta like he was saying to make your life count for something. Yeah, it sounded better when he said it, Naruto admitted with a shrug. Neeson, that sounded just fine, Konohamaru admitted to a startled Naruto. Then, he noted the drizzle was finally relenting. Sighing, INO closed her umbrella, relishing the ability to quit looking so stupid. Her mum had insisted on it, however, so she, like many other girls, had stood under the umbrella. To INO, it had made her self-conscious, as if calling attention to the fact that she was a self-absorbed brat. Naruto hadn't seemed to notice though, he had been standing next to the new Hokage and the two Sanin. Still, INO was at least thankful not to be Hinata at that moment. The Hyuga girl had stood against her will under an awning next to her father and younger sister. Talk about conspicuous. Sakura somehow had managed to forego the umbrella and stand proudly in the rain next to the Uchiha she was so in love with. Then, thinking about how depressed the girl had been, Ino unintentionally sought her out. Sakura was walking away, hand in hand with Sasuke. Many took him to be depressed, but Ino had seen him up close. She had seen the look in his eyes, the set of his jaw. He had withdrawn, but he was a storm brewing. There was danger written in his countenance that everyone else seemed oblivious to. Despite that, Ino felt a stab of jealousy as she watched the two of them. Not because of Sasuke, but rather to the fact that Sakura and Sasuke both had someone to comfort them. Someone to help them through things, to simply care, because Ino knew that Sasuke did care in some way for Sakura. So while Ino had her family, it wasn't the same and she was jealousy. It would never be the same, as when Sasuke would seek and hold Sakura's hand. Or the possessive way Sakura would hug Sasuke and not let go. Ino. Turning at the sound of her mom's voice, she blinked, staring up at the reproachful woman. Can I say something? Sure. Ino allowed, turning slightly to jealously watch Sakura and Sasuke. No Uchiha ever actually loves anyone, her mom said softly, moving closer. At least, not as we love people. It's pointless to love him if he can't love you back. Mom minus Ino started to say before her mom continued undaunted. If you love him, it's because he's safe. We Yamanaka are never satisfied with being safe. I'm not in love with him, Ino said with a note of pain. I just want someone to care about me, just a bit, and not like you and Dad care for me. Oi, you okay? Naruto's voice suddenly interjected, prompting Ino to turn and look at the blonde. You look like the old man at the restaurant, whenever I mention not being hungry. I'm fine, Ino admitted semi-distractedly. I'm just, like, really sad and thinking. Yeah, well, I'm going to Ichiraki for some ramen, Naruto said, sounding defected as he glanced from her to Sasuke and Sakura, then back. Thought I'd see if you wanted to come along, but I guess not. Ino blinked, confused at his actions. That had been so unlike the Naruto she knew. She considered going after him and asking what was wrong, but ultimately decided against it. Sighing, she turned to say something to her mom but froze at the slightly disappointed look on the woman's face. What? Dear, it's not wise to ignore a granted wish. The Kami might not appreciate it, her mom said with a slight reprimand in her tone. What are you talking about? He came over here to check on you, her mom responded, nodding at the retreating Naruto. I think that qualifies as caring. Mom, Ino said in annoyance, then paused. Actually, her mom had a point, which was scary. Ino didn't like it when her parents were right. It upset the natural order of things and it was annoying as hell. Oh, well. I have to get back to the house and start dinner. Your great aunt is coming over for supper. At least, if Inoichi can get her to agree, but I don't know if he can. From what I hear, Swan-sama is very fickle. Ino nodded absently, staring at Naruto's retreating back. He was her friend. Definitely not her boyfriend, or even a crush, Ino was sure of that. But Ino could also admit she was a bit infatuated with him. It was hard not to be after all, considering the time she had spent with him. She was still the only one he trusted with the truth about his family. He had helped her cope with her first kill, he was an okay guy, and he had defended her several times. More importantly, he seemed to care. Do you think I could invite someone? Ino asked after a moment, glancing at her bemused-looking mom. I suppose so. Nodding, Ino started after the boy, muttering too softly. I knew I was right about the black. Shizune had searched the village, as unobtrusively as possible, searching for her sensor. Tsunade, however, had somehow managed to disappear, and the only logical place that the Sannin could be at was the gates, waiting to slip away in silence. Approaching the massive gates leading out of the village, Shizune hugged the pig in her arms, just a tad tighter. There was a lump forming in her throat at the mere thought of leaving. Shizune didn't want to leave, but she couldn't just let Tsunade go off on her own. She owed her Uncle Dan. Shizune was responsible for keeping Tsunade from getting out of control. Though Shizune had to admit that she had not always done that job, for the first few months all Shizune had done was torment her mentor. This woman had let Dan die, and Shizune had clung to that rationalization for a long time. Until she realized that Tsunade was already torturing herself far worse than Shizune could ever hope to. After she realized that, Shizune realized that Dan had loved her and that she should not be torturing Dan's love. She should be trying to protect it, trying to help it heal. But Shizune was a clueless child, she had no idea how to do that, so she had settled on keeping Tsunade grounded. Sighing, the medic Nin looked at the gates, and then blinked, realizing that they were sealed. Slowing to a stop, the dark-haired woman looked around curiously, wondering where Tsunade was. By all rights the Sannin should have been her, she was a creature of habit and this was where they had left from last time. Tonton. The pig squeaked softly, wiggling in her arms. Tonton. Shizune whispered, looking at her pet, then lost her grip, letting the pig fall to the ground. A moment later, it went skittering away, off to the left, past the benches and into the park where Shizune remembered a lake being. Running after the pig, Shizune wondered why until, panting, she came to a halt just at the edge of the park. Sitting against a tree overlooking the moonlit lake, was Tsunade, who was now cradling the pig in her arms. Shizune noticed belatedly the open sake bottle and saucer nearby. Tsunade. Shizune, you know I came here once when I was younger, Tsunade said, staring at the lake absently. I was a genin, and Freya was trying to be, UN Freyish. I called him on it. Asked what the hell he was thinking would happen. You know what he told me. Shizune blinked and then brushed her hair behind her ear. She wasn't sure why her master was saying this, and it was a bit unnerving. No. He told me, admitted, he was a pervert, Tsunade said with a perfectly straight face. He always would be, but he wanted me to know that when it mattered, he'd be gallant for me. So? Shizune prompted gently. I laughed in his face and said, the gallant Freya. Stick to peeking up skirts, you pervert. Tsunade said sourly, before sighing. But he always kept that promise. Every time I needed someone to be gallant, Freya kept his promise. Shizune nodded silently, wondering what was going on inside the older woman's mind. Was it just a trip down memory lane before leaving? Or was there another reason, perhaps related to that dinner with her distant family, or the blonde boy they had met in the Hokage's office? This village is filled with nothing but bitter memories for me, Tsunade said distantly, looking up at her. He was gallant again today, and I realized that he was the last one I should ever lash out at. I don't understand, Shizune said, shifting her weight, wanting to know and be on their way. Tsunade-sama, aren't we leaving? We'll be staying for a while. I've agreed to take over as the director of Konoha's healthcare program. Tsunade said, glancing away. So we're staying? Shizune asked, blankly stunned by the turn of events. Yes, until I know, Tsunade said, sighing, if he deserves the cursed necklace. Shizune nodded and sighed, feeling a bit relieved. It looked like she would be staying, like she had wanted to. But then she realized what Tsunade had said, and she wondered who he was. I'll have to see Kakashi about arranging a mission to escort me. I has a lot of work to do before we can really settle down. Wait, mission? What mission? Kakashi couldn't help but sigh, settling into the chair silently. He still felt like he was intruding on the Sandaime, kept expecting the old man to show up and claim his place. But Kakashi knew that wouldn't be happening. The Sandaime was dead and buried. He was officially the Godame Hokage, and as a glance at the clock on the wall confirmed, it was nearly midnight. Nearly 72 hours into his official reign, and he was seriously considering letting Naruto just take over. Shaking his head, drooping, he instead looked at that stack of paperwork on his desk. Studying the papers, he glanced at his so far unread Ika book. Looking between the two, he wondered which he should choose. On the one hand, he could handle the paperwork, which was mostly pointless red tape, or he could read his precious. The responsible thing would be to handle the paperwork. The Kakashi thing would be to read his book. Weighing this heavy decision, he stumbled across the most obvious answer. He created a single cave bunshine and sent it off with the paperwork. Chuckling at his ingenuity, he picked up his precious and flicking it open to his bookmark, began to read. At least until he felt a presence in the office. Snapping his head up, he found one Mitarashi Anko standing in front of the desk, munching on her trademark stick of dango. A sudden chill swept over him as he realized what this meant. He was in an empty tower with a woman that not only had a proven unstable personality, but whom he had also slept with. Anko. Is there a reason you're in my office so late? Well, Anko said, a grin that didn't reach her eyes on her face. I was sorta hoping to discuss a few things with you, Hokage-sama. Ahaha, Kakashi managed, reaching up to scratch the back of his head, his eye closed in nervousness. What, exactly, did we need to talk about? Well, first to remind you that the Sandame agreed to only give me and my team B rank or higher missions. That was only for you and Naruto, Kakashi mused, then seeing her look continued. However, I wasn't planning on changing that. After all, your team has 2 Chunin and a talented genin, so they're perfectly qualified to such missions. Good. Good. Anko nodded, taking a vicious bite out of her stick of dango, causing Kakashi to wince. Now, I has a mission I want you to reserve for me. A mission? Kakashi echoed blankly. What mission and why? The basics are simple enough, Anko said, holding her fingers up as she ticked of the requirements. First, I need it to be an assassination mission, hence rank A. Second, it needs to be performed solo. 3. It needs to be relatively quick and to the point, with no gray areas. Kakashi stared at the woman curiously. True, some ninja made such requests, but Anko had never been so particular. Sensing something else at play, he sat back in his chair studying her features. Before I agree to this, who exactly did you has in mind for assigning it to? Naruto, Anko said simply, with a shrug. Who else would need or be ready for such a simple mission? Kakashi blinked, then sat forward, eye wide as he stared at her. I haven't even had a full week as an official Hokage, and you want me to give Naruto a solo A-rank assassination mission? Yeah, Anko said, munching on her dango happily. Do you hate him? Kakashi asked weakly, then at her scowl sighed. Then it's me you hate me, right? This is to get back at me for using Sasuke as a messenger during the exams. No, that's just a perk, Anko admitted, sitting on the edge of his desk, rubbing the finished dango stick suggestively against her lips. I was just thinking he needs to do at least one. Kakashi managed, his visible eye widening at the suggestive image. I'd be really grateful, Anko purred before flicking the stick with her tongue suggestively. Kakashi managed then, as her coat slid down her shoulder, revealing a lack of fish netting. He gulped audibly. Oh, of course. Just as soon as we get 01. Anko grinned at that and winked, hopping off the desk and tossing her dango stick away. That's a good Hokage. Kakashi nodded numbly, watching as she sauntered out of his office and then sitting back in his chair let out a frustrated sigh. Kami, she knew just how to get him to do what she wanted. More frighteningly, Kakashi knew that now that she had him committed, he couldn't back out for fear of her retaliation. Anko was both very seductive and very, very frightening. Naruto sneezed once more, setting the small box of items down on the bed amid a cloud of dust. It was filled, of all things, with the various items he'd received while in the hospital. Rubbing his nose, he sighed. Overall, the house wasn't too bad, but it was definitely dusty. Pausing, he mentally took stock of the house once more. It had an entrance area, which required opening another door to enter the actual house, a large living room with a modest kitchen located to the right of it, 2 large bedrooms, a bathroom that had to be expanded with seals, since it had 2 separate showers, a bathtub that he could almost swim in, and 2 sinks, and to top it all off, a storage room. The storage room was bugging him though. As of yet, he'd been unable to open it, but Kakashi had warned him about things like that. As to the second floor, he hadn't been up there just yet, but he'd found a trapdoor ladder that he could pull down to climb up there. Naruto was actually more concerned with trying to find some way of being comfortable here. Sure, he'd been alone in his old place, but now he was really isolated. He was 30 feet off the ground on the side of a mountain. That was isolation if he had ever heard of it. Plus, that was another reason, he had yet to spend a lot of time in the place. Feeling his 2 cave bunshine expire, he sighed, feeling a slight stab of pain behind his eyes. Iro Sennin had warned him about using the cave bunshine to relay information for the next 6 months, but Naruto had things to do. Namely, finish setting up his selected bedroom, which he considered the only enjoyable perk of owning a house. He could now look out over the village, with a breathtaking view, while denying the sun a chance to peek in at him during the mornings. Best of all, the few windows on his house were one way. The Yondem really was a smart bastard. Chuckling, he left the box where it was and strolled out of the second bedroom / current storage area and into the kitchen, where he collected an already prepared cup of instant ramen. Kami blessed the cave bunshine minus, and a moment later he was outside. Pausing to take in the impressive view of a forest. Waking up in the early morning, he sat down on the edge of the walkway that wrapped around his house and began eating. In a rare moment of introspection, he mused about how much things had changed, how different the world seemed. The burdens he was carrying, the responsibilities, Anko, his team, Freya, the QB no Yoko being sealed inside him. Kakashi as Hokage. Now that just so strange he almost couldn't believe it. Shaking his head, he set his now empty cup of ramen aside and leaned back on his hands, kicking his feet in the air. A moment later, he nearly fell as a voice spoke up from behind him. "Morning, brat." "Gah." Naruto screamed, panicking, and then, assuring he wasn't about to fall, turned to glare up at the grinning white-haired Sanin Freya. "What the hell are you thinking, you pervert?" "That you'd make a great big red splat," Freya remarked coarsely, sitting down beside him. "So, Kakashi gave you this place, huh? How do you like it?" "Zakai, I guess. A bit empty though," Naruto admitted with a shrug. "I grew up alone, so it's not really a big deal, and I mean it's great having a family house, but it's not the same as a family technique. I don't really feel like I belong here or anything." "Hey, that's understandable," Freya nodded. "The Yondem didn't stay up here too much. It was his getaway spot, I suppose, but he sure as hell didn't live here." "Ah," Naruto said with a nod, then, after a moment of silence, glanced at the older man. So what brings you by? There's not a swimming hole or bath around here, so you can't be here to peep." "You really are getting smarter," Freya said fondly before sighing. "Anyway, I'm here to see if you'd accept an offer to come train with me. We'd has to leave the village, even the country." "Ho. Why?" Naruto managed, startled. "I'm a Sanin, plus I know a lot more than anyone else in this village. I could read underneath the underneath of the underneath in the report concerning Itaki. We need to get some control over it quickly. Plus, if my sources are right, Akatsuki is going to start actively hunting for you." "Akatsuki? Why?" "Itaki is joining them, and Orochimaru has abandoned their ranks. The only reason he's not dead is because he's spilled the beans about you. They won't move openly, they never has minus, but they will move. They've wasted too much time not to. This village wouldn't survive that sort of assault at the moment. Each one is as powerful as any cave, plus with Itaki on their side, they'd especially has no problems getting in here and taking you." "Damn it," Naruto said loudly, glaring at the village, knowing that he was putting them in danger by remaining. "Naruto, what I'm asking is hard, I know. If you stayed here, kept training with Anko, you could get strong enough to be Hokage. You wouldn't have to give up everything you've fought for. But staying is a luxury you can't have. I know. If I stay, those maniacs will come after me, and I'm not strong enough to stop them." "I'd never be strong enough in time," Naruto said, lowering his gaze. "They may not, they might need to catch other demons first. That could buy you some time. I can't risk that. I can't risk the village, because I'm selfish. I have to do what's best for the village," Naruto said haltingly, as he pictured all his important people. "And everyone inside it. Even if it means your life." "I'm going to be Hokage," Naruto said firmly, staring at Freya, daring him to deny it. "I have to protect the village no matter what." Freya was silent for several long minutes, staring at him, then he grinned. "Hey, you know what? I've known 3 Hokages in my lifetime, and I've never met one that dressed in orange before." Getting up, the old man groaned. "I'll inform that brat Kakashi before I leave. I have to clear up a few things with my publisher, so a month or so from now, I'll come back and we'll start training. I'm pretty sure Akatsuki will wait for things to calm down around here before they start moving." "Yeah, right, publisher." Naruto snorted in disbelief. "You just talked to Anko and that girlfriend of yours, what's her name, INO?" Freya responded with a knowing smirk. "What? She's just my teammate." Naruto protested despite the heat in his cheeks. "Uh-huh. Face it, you like that green-eyed girl. Ino-chan's eyes are blue." "And thank you for proving my point," Freya said with a twisted grin before disappearing in a cloud of smoke. "Gah!" Naruto shouted, grabbing his head in frustrated disbelief. Chapter 26 Mist, Unity and Gambling Debt. Uzumaki Naruto was not having a good day, then again considering the past few days it was not a surprise. First, Ichiraki had been closed for renovations, and then he had discovered his serious depletion of weapons and other items a ninja needed. Then, because she couldn't kill him, Anko had apparently decided to torture him. She had done something unforgivable. Mitarashi Anko had burned nearly all of his jumpsuits, leaving Naruto with only his tune-in vest, the various shirts he had scrounged over the years, and the tattered jacket he was currently wearing. Correction, the tattered jacket he was patching while his teammates trained. Naruto sat under a tree, sewing patches of orange into the tattered fabric, squinting as he worked. The orange he was using wasn't even the right color, but it didn't matter. As long as he could keep the jacket just a bit longer, then Naruto was happy. INO still didn't understand his attachment to orange. Nobody seemed to really, other than Rock Lee. The two had only hung out together once, and even then, it had been to beat the crap out of each other. Lee had managed to come out on top in that exchange, but that was okay since it had just been taijutsu. Still, Lee at least understood the importance of orange to Naruto, much as Naruto now understood the importance of green spandex to Lee. For Lee, the spandex was a sign of his dedication of becoming a great ninja solely by using taijutsu. For Naruto, the orange was important because it made him stand out. It forced people to acknowledge his presence, because when Naruto had been growing up in the orphanage, the children had been expected to just blend into the background. People didn't want to notice children that nobody wanted or cared about. They had to dress the same, has the same haircut, and most importantly stay silent. Naruto had been unable to stay silent, and they had gone to great lengths to try to force it, though all attempts failed. When he had been offered entrance to the Ninja Academy, by a smiling Mizuki no less, he had been forced to leave the orphanage. Naruto had set up shop in a nearly condemned apartment building, and for the first time he was allowed to pick his own clothes. It was by pure luck that he discovered the disgruntled shop owner ready to destroy his entire stockpile of orange jumpsuits. Naruto had begged and pleaded, then happily took the free clothes. After that, nobody ignored him. He refused to change even in the face of Shinobi Rule 20. A shinobi must walk and hide within the shadows of deceit. He must not seek attention, nor should he desire anything other than remaining hidden. To Uzumaki Naruto, orange was a divine color, the perfect color no matter what anybody else thought. Naruto-kun, why don't you just buy a new jacket? INO asked suddenly, and Naruto looked up to find the two other ninja breaking for lunch. Anko of course was busy trying to run damage control, since Naruto had retaliated for burning his clothes, so it was just the three of them for the day. Why? Naruto asked, clueless, knowing of course that while INO was nicer to him, she hadn't grown up like he had. Well, that jacket is ruined, so just buy a new one, INO explained, sitting down across from him. I mean, you're doing really good at sewing. I can't even do that good a job, but still. Oh. But INO-chan, it's perfectly fine. Naruto protested, holding it up proudly. Besides, it's orange. There aren't any other orange jackets in this whole village. Yes, and Naruto, don't you remember Shinobi Rule 20? INO countered determinedly. A shinobi must walk and hide within the shadows of deceit. He must not seek attention, nor should he desire anything other than remaining hidden. Orange is hardly subtle. Oh, it's a stupid rule, Naruto said, smiling at her before turning back to his work on patching his jacket. Besides, buying a new jacket, when I has a perfectly good one, is a waste of money. Oh, INO said with a note of sudden understanding, and when he looked up he found her looking slightly embarrassed. Oi, what is it? Well, it's just. INO paused and her voice dropped. You grew up without money. Naruto-kun, it's okay to buy stuff you want. You've run a few high-rank missions, you should has a lot of money. You can afford new clothes. Naruto stared at her for a moment, unsure whether to feel hurt, angry or touched. Apparently, she saw what he was feeling, because she suddenly looked awkward and opened her mouth to say something when he beat her to the punch. Oi, INO-chan, it's not that I can't or think I can't afford stuff. I love orange, like you love purple. To me it's the perfect color. If I has a perfectly good orange jacket, I see no reason to buy something I hate. But, INO stammered with wide eyes, why do you like orange? You know, as riveting as this discussion is, a new voice interjected, and the two ninja looked around to find Kiba and Akamai standing on the edge of the clearing. The Hokage wants to see you three. Kiba? INO asked, blinking. Oi, what's that masked pervert want? Naruto asked, not moving from where he was sitting. The dog boy blinked before Sakura, Sasuke, and Kurenai arrived. Hey, he sent your whole team just to find us. What are you guys, just messengers now? No, Kurenai said, eyeing him darkly, I requested this as a training exercise in tracking. Whatever, Naruto said, springing to his feet and throwing his jacket on before picking up his nearly empty weapons pouch. Kurenai sensor, did the Hokage happen to mention why he wished to see us? Shino asked, walking over to join his team. Oi, probably wants to give us an A-rank mission. Naruto said brightly, overriding the now openly irritated Kurenai. More likely he wants you three to clean up the shit in the Inuzuka kennel, Kiba said with a smirk while we're doing the high-rank mission. No, I'm pretty sure that's what your sister does, Ino shot back. No she doesn't. Kiba retorted angrily, his smirk fading. Oh, then why else would she spend her time in a dog kennel on her hands and knees? Ino asked with mock innocence. Naruto blinked as her innuendo crashed through his brain, and turned to stare at a smugly grinning Ino, then turned back to the other team. The look of shock on Kiba's face was priceless, the sheer horror on Kurena's was beautiful, Sakura's blush was interesting, and Sasuke's wide-eyed surprise was perfect. He turned back to Ino, and said the only thing he could think of. Sweet Kami, you're perfect. Took you this long to figure that out? Ino said lightly, smiling at him. If you two are done flirting, Shino said, walking between them and past the frozen team, the Hokage would like to see us. We weren't flirting. Naruto and Ino shouted in unison and then hurried after him. Tsunade-sama, I still don't see why old Kiyoshi-san can't be allowed to go, Shizune said, handing the buxom blonde a pack of scrolls. Tsunade paused, a frown marring her features as she fixed her apprentice with a glare. Honestly, Shizune should have known by now not to argue with her over something like this. Then again, Shizune would be afraid of Tsunade trying to escape. As if Tsunade had accepted the position as head of the healthcare system in Konoha, she would not just abandon things after that. Kiyoshi has to stay here to make sure the hospital runs properly, Tsunade finally said, turning back to her packing. You need to stay here to start making the changes I want. You're better at that sort of thing than me. Also, for some of the people I'll be dealing with, you're less than fully equipped. Tsunade-sama. Shizune squeaked, arms covering her modest chest that was hidden away by the formless black kimono she always wore. Just being honest, Tsunade said, turning to grin at her apprentice. Now then, just make sure things run smoothly, and, if they don't, feel free to ask Kakashi to kill someone. He's got to be good for something after all. Tsunade-sama, you shouldn't speak that way about the Hokage. Shizune chided, wagging a finger slightly. Hokage. I'm sorry, but I look at him and I still see Sakumo's snot-nosed whiny runt running around naked. Tsunade said, laughing at the memory of trying to drink tea while this little kid ran around naked in the house. Sakumo had been so embarrassed, but the Sanin had assured him it was a relief to see a semi-normal kid, though Orochimaru had made a comment later about genetics. Chuckling, Tsunade picked up her furoshiki and the suitcase of money. At her request, they had paid her for a year in advance. Tsunade had figured if she would be making this trip, she should try to pay off her more outstanding debts. Shizune had been thrilled at her decision, until discovering that Swan would be leaving without her. Tsunade-sama, please let me come along, Shizune tried one more time before the Sanin stopped and turned, glaring at her. I'm over 50 years old, Shizune-ku, I think I can pay off my own debts while I get what we need to Konoha without getting into trouble. Tsunade snapped, then seeing Shizune quail, smirked. Now you have fun, and keep in mind that Hatek genetics are very generous. Then with that, she left the small apartment, the door closing behind her with a thunk. Whistling in amusement, the legendary strolled down the hallway, ignoring the looks of all she received, and then out to the street. Oh, to be free, Tsunade's soul sang, at least 2 weeks without Shizune nagging at her constantly. Though she would never admit that to the young woman's face, after all, Shizune was Tsunade's favorite student. Plus the girl had been there for her through some hard times, so they were friends. It was just that Shizune could be bitchy at times. Part of Tsunade actually hoped that the girl ended up spending a night with the Hokage, maybe getting laid would loosen her up. Passing the village park, Tsunade paused long enough to spot the various children at play, then hurried along, her heart aching as she remembered playing with Nawaki there. A few moments later, she passed the academy, quickening her pace, wishing to not remember any of the memories she associated with that place, and 3 blocks later entered the Hokage Tower. The office workers of course froze upon seeing her. She was a legendary figure after all, but still parted before her. It seemed to take no time to climb the stairs and enter the Hokage's office. The office itself was unchanged, and she almost expected to find Satobi sitting at the desk, puffing on his pipe. The air should have been thick with the comforting scent of cherry, or whatever flavored tobacco he had been using at the time. Instead, it was filled with the scent of air freshener, and the Hokage who sat behind the desk was only in his mid-20s. Hey Kakashi, you got my teen yet? Tsunade asked, approaching the desk, staring at the masked man who didn't even bother to look up from his book. They should be downstairs. I've sent Kotetsu to bring 'em up, Kakashi said, causally turning the page of his book. I hope you don't mind, but I found a team that can anticipate your every move. I don't need babysitters, Tsunade grated out darkly. Oh no, Kakashi said, finally looking up, and his eye closed happily. They're not your babysitters, just the ones best suited to drive you crazy. Eh? Tsunade managed, blinking, before the door to the office opened and a loud voice boomed into the silence. Oi, we're here, masked ped. What you want? Turning, Tsunade found Azumaki, Naruto, Yamanaka, INO, and what was obviously an Abain standing in the office doorway. Naruto spotted her a second later and, eyes widening, pointed, hey, it's. He stopped, however, and scowled, crossing his arm, going into deep thought. I am amazed he has yet to find a nickname for you, the Abain said stoically as ever. Oi, I know, Naruto suddenly boomed, pointing at Tsunade. It's the Kupeani. What did you say? INO asked slowly, a tad too sweetly, turning to glare at the boy. I said, it's the Kupeani. Naruto answered, scowling in thought. Never say that. INO shrieked, grabbing the front of his jacket and shaking him like a rag doll. Okay. Naruto squeaked, and when she released him, huffed, she's Kupe Baba. Naruto. INO screeched. Tsunade blinked, half amused and half offended. It was something that her brother might have shouted, then again, it was also something Freya might have said while leering. It was then that Tsunade realized just how painful having him on this mission would be. He reminded her too strongly of so many people that she had lost or known. I'm happy to see that you've kept your sense of humor, Naruto, Kakashi interjected over the squabble. I'm sure you'll need it when Anko gets done with smoothing out the chaos you created for her this morning. Hey, it was her fault. Naruto said defensively, though his eyes belayed the worry he felt. What exactly did you do? Tsunade found herself asking, fascinated with the boy and what he could have done to piss off Anko even more. Well, she burned my jumpsuits, Naruto explained with a frown before grinning slightly. So I used the sexy no jutsu variation to appear like her. It lets me mimic a person right down to their chakra and it doesn't fade until I let it. And you pretended to be her, Tsunade summarized, impressed with the jutsu he had just described. It was like the hand, only 20 times more potent. Yep. A naked Anko, who ran through the streets hugging random people, claiming to love them. Naruto said, laughing. The best was when. Haha. Kurenai got hugged and I. Ha 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 ha. Made Anko kiss her on the mouth. You did. What? Kakashi asked, startled and sounding far more interested than would be expected for a Hokage response. Yeah, so Anko spent the whole morning trying to convince everyone it wasn't her. Naruto gloated, hands behind his head. So that is why Kurenai-san was glaring at you. Shino said, before shaking his head. Naruto, if you were a few years older, Tsunade said, staring at him in amazement. I would kiss you. Eh? For what? Naruto asked, clueless about the glare INO was sending Tsunade. Because, I've always wanted to see Anko in a panic, and any guy that can do it deserves a kiss. Tsunade answered, ignoring the glare, which she found more amusing than intimidating. Seeing his surprise and tiny smile, Tsunade turned back to the Hokage and cleared her throat. So are you going to brief them or keep picturing those two kissing? Right, Kakashi managed, keeping his voice level as he addressed the team. I'm assigning you a B-rank mission, not out of difficulty, but because it is of utmost importance. You see, this is a mission to help bolster our village healthcare. Tsunade-sama requires an escort, and I selected your team since you're comprised of 2 talented Chunin and 1 highly talented Genin as the best for this mission. Wait. So all we get to do is just walk around with? Naruto paused, and seeing the look on INO's face changed whatever he was going to say. That lady. There was a moment of silence as all of them, including Tsunade, were taken back by his choice of words. From what Tsunade had gathered, it was a lot nicer than what he would normally use. Maybe her great-niece had some promise after all. Essentially yes, Kakashi said, nodding slightly. Tsunade-sama will be carrying a large amount of money to help settle old business she has, so you'll be guarding it mostly. As a Sanin, Tsunade-sama personally doesn't need a team to watch out to her, though after the debt is paid you'll still act as honor guard. Well, that's okay then, Naruto said with a grin. We can leak word about the money and fight the bandits. That'll keep us entertained while we work. You know, Tsunade muttered to Kakashi, he reminds me an awful lot of Anko. I know. Deifu-sama. Yes. Deifu said softly, his pen paused and just barely looking up from his paperwork at the man in the doorway. Abaku-san is here, the man said, motioning with his head slightly. He has information that he says you should hear. From Konoha. Oh. Send him in. Daifu offered, sitting back in his seat as the door closed. A moment later it reopened and Abaku entered, dressed neatly as always. The man bowed respectfully as the door closed once more. Abaku-san, it is so nice to see you again. Daifu-sama, it is an honor to see you once more. So, you has information from Konoha. What kind of news could be so important as to drag a man away from his family on such an important day? Our source within the hidden village whispered to me 3 things, Abaku said, glancing at the only other man present, Aki, who had been quietly examining his own set of papers. One is that the Hyuga has taken something of great value to the Uchiha and hidden it. Another that the Yondem Hokid has a son. And last, Daifu said, eyes almost glowing in interest. The information so far had been very interesting and potentially very valuable. Last and most importantly, that the legendary Sasuke Tsunade is traveling through the area. Tsunade? Is she looking to increase her debt? Daifu asked with a soft chuckle. No, Abaku said she is traveling to gather supplies to increase Konoha's healthcare, first here to Idioto, and then to Crater City. She is also carrying a great deal of money to pay off her debts in Otafukigai. So then, she has money, but does not think to pay us. Daifu said sadly, sitting back in his leather chair. We who fronted her a great deal of money. We, who bought out many of her former debts from the other Yakuza families. Wasn't it us that kept her dear friend Shizune from having to work in a brothel to pay off such a debt that even a minor shinobi village would go bankrupt? Yes, Daifu-sama, Abaku agreed, equally saddened. She has apparently forgotten us, her best and dearest of friends. Obviously, Daifu murmured, standing slowly and moving to stare out the blinds of his window, watching the bustling village below him. It was time to collect, at least partially, upon the debt she owed them. Tsunade needed to learn Sanin or not, nobody cheated the Yakuza. Turning, he swept the dark room with its patterned shadows and then settled his iron gaze upon Aki, who was his most trusted lieutenant. Aki-san, I wish for you to contact Isarabai-san. I would ask of him to please retrieve the money for us. Of course, Daifu-sama, Aki said, climbing to his feet and bowing politely, leaving in the company of Abaku. Oh. My dear Tsunade-chan, Daifu intoned softly, turning back to the window alone once more. I weep for the steep price you will pay. Within Konoha, there are places, dark and forgotten places deep under the ground of the village, and even the Unbu integration cells. These places were created for various functions: escapes, food storage against seas, forbidden weapons, and at least one had been where a traitorous Sanin had performed his more ghastly research. Within these places of darkness was an average-sized, utterly unremarkable room bathed almost completely in darkness. 3 men currently resided within this room, unfazed by the darkness that filled it. 2 of these men stood professionally before the third, who was seated against the wall, between 2 bookcases and behind a desk covered haphazardly with folders and papers. The only noise in this utterly unremarkable room was the sound of subtle breathing and the scratching of a pen on parchment. Sir, we has confirmation that the messages were delivered to Daifu. The man on the left said, his voice that of one from the grave, filtered though it was through the mask he wore. Good. The man behind the desk said, his attention shifting to the 2 that stood before him. Then Hyria can proceed with his mission. How? The man on the right said, standing even more rigid. What is the final decision? Make contact, the man behind the desk said, turning his attention completely to Hyria. After the elegant monster of the mist withdraws, offer him the deal we made to Zed-san. Tell him that if he would help us in our great cause for unity, that we will in return repay his kindness in whatever manner he wishes. How? And if he accepts? Then you are of course to ask humbly that he removes Daifu from control of that family. If he inquires as to why we wish for this, you are to explain that we has other agents working toward an understanding with the esteemed Tsunade. The removal of Daifu, along with the solemn agreement with A-san to forget her debts when he assumes control, will greatly help us. How? Hyria said, then bowing turned and disappeared into the darkness, disappearing completely. Sir, shall I contact Zed-san now? The other man said, bringing the man behind the desk's attention back to him. Before that, D-sama has orders that he can only give you, his most loyal of subordinates. Whatever D-sama asks of me I shall perform, the man responded, kneeling respectfully before the desk. Very well, the man behind the desk said, D-sama would like you to contact the remaining brother, who is to deliver this message to O-san, who resides in the field. We are endeavoring to help you as you has requested at the meeting within the boundaries of death. We has located 2, one under heavy watch by both us and your agent. Another is hidden away by the clan of the sun we are endeavoring to locate. Upon discovery we will await your decision and hope that the agreement between our two parties can be achieved prosperously as we both wish. How? Second, D-Sama requires that you ensure to send a message to H. Dono saying all things are proceeding as agreed. The CV of both H and K has accepted that any action beyond the wall should not involve the country. The reign and those whom you decide may be dealt with as it has been decreed. How? Finally, D-Sama requests that you apply the first L seal to T-san, to ensure that N-kan is on the correct path. How? The kneeling man said sharply, standing once more. What of Z-san, is there any particular method or way of approach preferred to this objective? Yes, the man behind the desk said. First tell Z-san that this shall be the last task we require as payment to the agreement struck. When D-Sama brings us unity, Z-san shall have the support needed to achieve his goal. Second, inform him that we request that he should send H-kan to deliver this message to Tsunade exactly as it is said within Konoha. We lack unity. We seek your aid in helping us to achieve this goal. As a sign of faith, we has removed those who would dishonor you by demanding money and wounding your comrades. If you decide to help us in our cause, then we shall help you as it is needed. If you decline, then we lose a vaunted ally. How? And if she does decline? Then Z-san and H-kan are to silence them. The man behind the desk said firmly, their deaths can be linked to Deifu easily and we will soon has his body at our disposal. We cannot risk their survival, as it could potentially create connections that we do not wish. How? I understand it will all be done as both D-Sama and unity requires. The man said before he too disappeared into the darkness. It had been a while since Tsunade had moved toward a target with such determination. For the last dozen or so years, the Sanin had meandered across the continent Shizune in tow. No set destination in mind, going only where her whims or fate carried her, doing her best to forget about her past, and that at one time her hands had been covered with blood. Yes, it had been many years since she had traveled with determination toward a specific goal. It had also been many years since she had been without Shizune, who had been a constant companion to Tsunade. A sort of relief from the solitude, when it became too much a trusted friend and comrade, who was a hell of a lot quieter than her current companions. Shino wasn't so bad. Tsunade knew his father since he had at one time tried to ask her out. The boy was quiet, kept to himself and focused entirely on his bugs. Most surprising was the fact that despite his teammates, he seemed perfectly balanced. No, Tsunade had no problem with Shino, rather it was with INO and Naruto who were less than quiet. The two blondes alternated between bickering and chatting about everything under the sun, which might have been amusing, except for the fact that they never shut up and talked in tones that set her teeth on edge. Ah, Naruto-kun, about your sexy no jutsu variation, INO suddenly said, her voice inquisitive. Can you really become anybody with it? Oh, well yeah, Naruto said with a nod, hands behind his head. Well, I gotta at least see them first. Hang out for a bit if I really want to copy them perfectly. INO said, silent for a moment. So has you used it to ever become me? Well, not yet, Naruto offered, his tone teasing, but when I get around to it I'll see about your lack of tits. INO naturally screeched at this, her kodachi slashing through the space he had been occupying. Naruto of course dodged and a minute later led INO on a merry little chase before ultimately being beaten to the edge of unconsciousness. Tsunade, who had watched the whole thing, shook her head. Kami, don't they ever stop? You get used to it, Shino offered from beside her. That was not, however, the last argument, since Naruto had recovered amazingly fast and launched into a spiel about how abusive INO was. After another 3 hours of the two arguing, Tsunade called an early lunch and threatened to sever their vocal cords if they spoke. Naruto had protested naturally, and Tsunade causally reached over, numbing them. As Naruto freaked out in amusing pantomime, the others laughed and started preparing their meals. It wasn't until near the end of lunch that Naruto's voice started to return, signaling the start of another 6 hours of torture. Sighing, the legendary medic closed her eyes and leaned her head back against the tree, musing about her life and how smart she had been to ensure there was a team to keep the money safe. Tsunade could already feel the urge to take the money and visit a gambling hall, but with it safely in the hands of Team 10. Well, she could still take it, but it would be marginally harder. INO, her niece, which was a concept she was still trying to grasp, was not a pushover. Nor was Shino, from what she gathered, and with Naruto, who had held a Varokumaru for a few minutes and defeated a Venturikai without help, it was more trouble than it was really worth. Obasan? INO asked, and Tsunade furked slightly at the address. Yeah. Tsunade replied, forcing herself to banish the strangeness of being called that. It was weird to be around family, even a branch of the family she had never really known about. It was even weirder to has a member of that branch address you so humbly or with such familiarity. Well, I was wondering where exactly we're going, Ino said, looking interested. Yeah, Kakashi-kun forgot to tell you that, Tsunade said, smirking at the mild shock on the girl's face at the casual way she had referred to the Hokiv. We're heading to Idioto, that's in the second region minus. Second region. Naruto interjected, suddenly looking up from his ramen. Did you sleep your way through the academy? Tsunade asked archly, then seeing his nod and grin sighed. INO Kuni is divided into 14 regions by size, each controlled by a governor. There's the central region, controlled by the daimyo and the Hokiv. Then there's first region and then the second region, which is where Idioto is, and so on. I see. Naruto said brightly. Tsunade kept the wince or the flash of pain hidden, but right then she had seen a flash of her brother. Noeki had reacted the exact same way when she had explained the regions to him so many years ago. So we're going to Idioto to see Governor O. He owes me a few favors from the Second Shinobi War, and I intend to collect since he has some of the best medical connections in other villages along with a great wealth of medicinal herbs. Wait. So why don't we already have access to them? Ino asked, looking confused. Because until now, Konoha never had someone in control of the healthcare system that would bother with increasing the options, Tsunade explained with a snort. Konoha, like all ninja villages, places a lot more effort into combat and reactive medicine. I'm going to start putting effort into proactive medicine, that way we'll be prepared for nearly anything. So after we go to Idioto, where do we go? Naruto asked, stretching as he stood. Back to Central Region, first to Otafuki so I can deal with my personal business. Then we'll head on to Crater City. They has a surplus of civilian doctors and materials that we can use even if they are normally sneered at by shinobi, Tsunade explained with a frown, but sometimes they're more useful than shinobi methods. Even medical jutsu can do so much, so the more options the better. Also, Idioto, here we come. Naruto shouted, and Tsunade felt a migraine beginning to form. Yamanaka Ino was feeling good, her arm finally free of the cast thanks to both Sakura and her great-aunt Minus. She was on a decent mission and she was getting to know her great-aunt even better. Most importantly, she was entering the famous city of Idioto, home of some of the most famous flowers in the country. Like the uke no namida, a flower that tradition said originally sprang from the blood of a heroic daimyo's tears. Primarily it was used at funerals of very important people. Idioto, Tsunade said blandly as they rounded the bend and came to a stop on a slight rise overlooking the city. Idioto was a sprawling city, arranged around an impressive castle directly in the center. The area immediately around the castle is made up of mansions, the high-ranking samurai and court nobles. Just beyond those are several temples, and beyond that a massive market area. It's bigger than Konoha, Ino admitted, eyes wide, a lot bigger. Of course it used to be the seat of power, the INO Kuni, Tsunade said, setting off, leading the three toward the massive city. The urban sprawl has gotten better over the years, more pleasant homes and rustic shops. That river is a nice place, it's got a few nice restaurants and even a nice place to walk alongside and think. Tsunade Basin, Ino said, glancing around impressed by the sheer number of people around them, but spotting the massive gate towering over the area to the left. What's that gate for? Oh, that, the Sanin said dismissively with a vague wave of her hand. It just marks the center of the city's commercial center. Many fishermen, craftsmen, and retailers operate there along with large shipping companies. Idioto might not be the seat of INO Kuni's political power, but it's still the center of the economy. Tsunade-sama, Shino asked softly, making the Sanin jerk slightly, having apparently forgotten he was there. I has noticed ninja marking our progress. They do not seem overly hostile, but they do not seem to hail from Konoha. Eh? The Sanin said, then glanced and snorted. Ojum. I think they're called INO Kuni ninja, basically state-controlled ninja. But I thought Konoha was the source of ninja, the INO Kuni, Ino said thoughtfully, glancing at her aunt. They were, if I don't all the details, but a governor has been trying to form them into his own private army. But where would he get such people? Shino asked, his interest apparently piqued, and surprisingly it was Naruto that answered the question. The smaller ninja academies throughout INO Kuni failed Konoha Academy students and former samurai. The blonde paused, scowling off to the side. They do lack even the basic stealth skills of academy students, Shino allowed, with what seemed to be disdain in his tone. Ino, however, was more interested in how Naruto had figured out the source without stopping to give it serious thought. Not as dumb as you look, eh? Or you listen to Anko when she talks. Tsunade said offhandedly to Naruto, before bringing them to a halt before a massive statue outside the streets where the mansions resided. Okay, you three go do whatever I need to see alone and we'll meet up later. That is not standard procedure, Shino said, an eyebrow rising up. Maybe not, Tsunade returned, glancing at him, but one, I'm a Sanin too. Oh, is an old friend who also happens to distrust most ninja, and 3, your mission is to guard the money, not me. Still, it would be better if you took one of us with you, Shino said firmly, his tone letting Ino know that he was not about to drop this. Ino, however, saw the slight tick in her aunt's eye that hinted at annoyance. She'd seen the older woman react the same way after a few of Naruto's nicknames. Hence, Ino knew exactly how violent things could become, so she did the most obvious thing. Shoving the briefcase into Naruto's hands, she covered Shino's mouth with her hand. Of course, Obasan. Please forgive him, he was just trying to do the right thing. Tsunade offered a fleeting smirk, then turning left them standing there. Releasing Shino, Ino took a step back as a soft buzzing noise filled the air and Shino turned toward her. Sorry, but remember what she did to Naruto. Oi, she just caught me by surprise. Naruto protested loudly. Ino rolled her eyes, and when she saw Shino nod she breathed a bit easier. The boy was a tad touchy lately, a marked contrast to how he had been when they were first put on the team. Then again, Shino could have been affected by Naruto's personality. Then seeing the way Naruto and Shino got along, she mused it could have been they had all influenced each other. Shaking it off, she smiled brightly. So should we go get some lunch? Lunch? Naruto asked happily, bright eyes darting around the city, obviously looking for a ramen stand. It sounds like a good idea, Shino said with a slight nod. However, I would prefer it not be ramen. Don't worry, it won't be, Ino assured him, ignoring Naruto's vocal protests, as she turned to led the way through the streets. So what kind of restaurants you think they has around here? Undoubtable good ones, Shino said, ignoring Naruto's grumbles as well. Oh, there's a wasabi restaurant. Ino said, eyes darting along the shops. Yakitori would be more preferable, Shino responded. Wasabi can has undesirable effects on my kaikai. Well minus, Ino said before being interrupted by the loud blonde from behind them. Oi! Don't I get a say in where we eat? Turning, Ino eyed the irate blonde, then glanced at Shino, then glanced at Naruto. A moment passed and then, she turned back to Shino, continuing as if she hadn't been interrupted. Yakitori sounds okay, but it's always been a tad strong for my taste. Things continued in this vein for a long while, much to Naruto's continued annoyance, though by the time they finally reached the restaurants along the river he was grinding his teeth. Ino of course knew he had been keeping his temper, why she wasn't sure, but he would snap soon. Shino came to the rescue by suggesting that they should eat in a modest restaurant that seemed to specialize in teriyaki and nabe. Naruto grumbling agreed and the three were seated at a table, the waitress bowing and smiling brightly before leaving them alone. It still amazed Ino, however, that somehow despite their efforts Naruto still managed to order ramen. Ino was beginning to recognize that it was impossible to keep Naruto and ramen apart. Propping her chin in her hand, the Kenbutsu user huffed in annoyance, much to Naruto's obvious amusement. If I may ask, Shino said after a moment, managing to sit stiffly at the table, has either of you thought about why we were assigned the mission? Oh. 'Cause we're the best. Naruto responded, blinking, as he stared at the boy. Excuse me, I misspoke, Shino said, inclining his head. I meant why was this mission assigned? So someone could guard the money. While that minus Naruto paused, glancing cautiously at Ino. Woman does her talking crap. That is true on the surface, Shino offered. However, consider our team. Each of us is among the most talented of our generation. This mission is a waste of our talent. Any genin team could handle such a mission as to guard money from bandits. Yeah. Naruto said in agreement, sudden understanding flooding his face. Plus, Tsunade Basin is a Sanin, so who could actually rob her? Ino asked, frowning as she too realized the oddness of this mission. Maybe, Shino offered as the food was delivered and the waitress left once more. We are not here to merely guard the money from bandits. Well, then who are we guarding the money from? Naruto asked with a touch of annoyance. It's not like she'd try and steal it. I was kidding, Naruto said quickly, staring back and forth. Between them I mean okay, she's a lot of things, but why would she steal her own money? Well, I know that some of my family has serious gambling problems, Ino offered seriously. She could be a chronic gambler. But it's her money. Naruto countered. That is destined to take care of, Shino said calmly. Tsunade-sama's old business. It could be that the money is to be put toward gambling debts. However, as a chronic gambler, she could be tempted into using it to gamble with. Holy hell, Naruto said, throwing his hands up, the briefcase dangling in one hand. All those sanins are fucked up. There's Iro Senin, who's just a big perth, then there's that snake bastard who tortures people for fun, and then there's Baba who gambles all her money away. Baba? Ino asked, mildly startled, wondering at Naruto's new choice of nickname. Well, she is over 50, Naruto offered with a snort, crossing his arms. I can live with that, Ino responded grudgingly before she turned her full attention to her food. As Tsunade passed through the stone gate set into the massive walls of interlocking battlements, she felt a flash of melancholy settle over her. The last time she had been to this shire, the Sandame had been alive, she had just turned Chunin, and Governor O had just achieved power. Shaking the memories off, Tsunade noted the samurai wearing red and black uniform kimonos bearing the circular flame insignias of INO Kuni. They moved with smart, military professionalism, their alertness doubling at her presence. Still, nobody moved to question or bar her yet. That would come later, and only because her arrival had been announced by those INO Kuni ninja. O always had been a bit more lax with his own personal safety than the safety of his people. Following the road she was on as it curved to the left, she smiled briefly as she traveled a vast avenue lined with heavily fortified houses behind easily defendable greater walls and lesser walls, then doubled on itself into a labyrinth of steps and roads. So maybe Ro wasn't as lax as he had been in the past. These would be a serious deterrent to most threats. The Sanin paused just beyond them to stare out at the carefully tended multicolored garden on the left before remembering Freya, telling her the story of when this castle had belonged to the first INO Kuni daimyo. How he had been a very paranoid man and built the castle to be a deliberate maze, but that he had built it too well and gotten lost in it, only to die in the garden, and now roamed the grounds as a ghost. Shivering from that memory, she turned away and continued to the final gate, which stood open though heavily guarded, allowing her to enter the inner courtyard, which was guarded by several more samurai. Pausing, she grinned, seeing the far door open, and set off at a brisk pace where she was bowed through the door to enter the fort. The corridor inside was richly carpeted with rush mats, clean and kind to the feet. Without stopping, Tsunade climbed the winding, defendable stairs, while passing through several additional corridors and stairs. Finally, she came to the last corridor, and after a sharp corner, the Sanin found a group of masked samurai with a young officer in front. Behind them was another door, outlined with iron for reinforcement, and Tsunade stopped short as she heard the whisper of a blade sliding partially out of a scabbard. Okay, which of you bastards wants his arm broke? Tsunade asked casually, being the masked group. When nobody moved, she sighed and glared at the samurai in charge. You better move, or I'm going to start spanking you like the babies you are. We has orders minus. Kanto-san, I would let Tsunade-sama through if I were you, an amused voice said, cutting the samurai off. A moment later, a grey-haired and grizzled samurai appeared from an unseen alcove. I has seen her when the mood is on her, and she is not one to play nicely with teething children. Akikai-sama, Kanto said, bowing, while looking rather upset. Our orders minus. I know your orders, I gave them to you, Akikai said blandly, turning to smile at Tsunade. Governor O has been expecting you. Please go in. Thanks, Ak-chan, Tsunade beamed, knowing that she was probably one of the few people that could get away with such informality. The young officer seemed to realize the situation and curtly motioned his men aside, allowing him to open the thick door himself. Giving the young man a narrow look, she walked past them, shoulders squared and chin high, every bit the legendary ninja that she was. The audience room was immense, 40 paces square and 10 feet high, the tatami mats of the best quality. There were 2 doors in the far wall. Near the dais, in a niche, was a small vase with a single spray of cherry blossom that gave the room a sweet fragrance. Tsunade made no indication that she had noticed the door closing behind her, or the 20 samurai kneeling in front of the dais. Instead, she focused on the impressive-looking governor, feeling slightly relieved to see his genial smile and the long hair he had always been so fond of. Tsunade Dono, it is so good to see you. The man said, quickly leaving the security of his samurai moving as if to embrace her, then thought better of it, motioning for her to join him outside out on his private balcony. Tsunade graced him with a beautiful smile, walking beside the shorter man. Oh Dono, you're looking quite well. How kind of you to say, even if I doubt it's the truth. The man grinned at her. So the trip was well. Of course, Tsunade chuckled. It's not like we has roaming enemy ninja in the countryside anymore. True, O said, stepping up to lean against the balcony railing. So, what brings so important medics such as yourself to see a lowly governor like me? Maybe I wanted to act on a crush, Sinead said, prompting his laughter, and she easily joined in before walking over to stand next to him. Seriously, Joe, I've returned to Konoha and I have the chance to improve the village healthcare system. Oh. So that's it. O said, glancing at her. What exactly do you need from me? Certain medical herbs that we don't grow in Konoha, Sinead explained. Adragil, ambrosia, bacta, isopruvine and metazine mostly. Also, any medical texts or experts would be appreciated. Those are some very rare, very expensive herbs, O said thoughtfully with a slight scowl. I'm not even sure the growers would agree to let Konoha has access to them. With the Yamanaka and Nara families, you could easily start growing your own and outproduce them. We can agree not to grow them, Sinead said with a snort of annoyance, but I want those herbs. I'd prefer to not have to ask my team to get them. Team? You came with a team? O asked, startled. They're guarding the money I need for my personal business, Sinead explained. Then seeing his smirk she continued in annoyance, but they're still very talented. I'm sure even with those high no kuni ninja, you has running around minus. Wait, there are high no kuni ninja in my city? O asked, his tone growing dangerous. I told Fuwa-san, I didn't want them in my city. Fuwa. He recently took over Region 7. He's been pushing the high no kuni ninja to be actively used by the other governors. The most notable convert is Governor Genji of Region 1. O explained sourly. His argument is that since Konoha is in turmoil that it would be best to use ninja whose loyalty is no longer doubted. Sinead said sourly, what little attachment she had to Konoha, feeling hurt at the distrust. I think he's just trying to use this to put high no kuni ninja into position to leverage, O explained, shaking his head. Fuwa is an ambitious man and I'm sure he'd love to take over as daimyo of high no kuni. Has you told the daimyo of your thoughts? No, O said, shaking his head. Governor Ito died under mysterious circumstances after all, making room for Fuwa to take over. I see. Sinead said in understanding. I'll tell the Hokage. He can reach the daimyo without worrying about his life. Thank you, the governor said, smiling. As to your medicinal herbs and contacts, I think I know how to arrange things. Good. Sinead said, nodding slightly. I would hate letting you ogle my chest go to waste. My dear Tsunae-chan, ogling your chest can never be a waste. Watching Ino and Naruto talking while bicker more than anything, Shino trailed behind them, thinking about the uneasiness he felt. Why would the high no kuni ninja that had been watching suddenly stop? It set Shino on edge, though Ino and Naruto seemed unconcerned. Shino, however, did not like what such a change could hold for them. Watching Naruto, reading his body language, Shino frowned behind the high collar of his jacket. Then there was the question of why Naruto was acting so cautious. It wasn't like him. Yes, Naruto was aware of surroundings and aware of danger. They all were. Still, there was something about the way he was acting that told Shino that Naruto knew more than he had bothered to tell them. Setting those questions aside for the moment, Shino briefly reached out to make contact with his kaikai that was currently on Tsunae. Things with the Sanin seemed fine. She was within the castle, and there was no hint of danger there. Then he felt a small surge of chakra and Shino turned his mind back to his immediate surroundings, thinking a denbutsu had been cast. However, after carefully reaching out with his kaikai, it proved false. Though he couldn't explain the surge of chakra, it didn't seem to belong to an attack. Cautiously turning his mind back to the two earlier considerations, Shino studied the river they were walking along. It almost seemed to glow under the setting sun, and Kikyo added that it was beautiful. He agreed silently with her, and turned back to why Naruto seemed so cautious and the high no kuni ninja. Oi, Shino, how much ride do you have? Naruto asked from up ahead, glancing over his shoulder. 20, Shino answered, silently spreading his kaikai out further to encompass the area. That question was a signal either Ino or Naruto could use to alert Shino that they felt something. Shino's answer confirmed that he had felt it too and that he would spread his family out further to check on the danger. So, has you ever been to this city before? Ino asked, focusing on Naruto, alerting them both with the word that she had noticed something. The girl had stopped using it lately, but it still made a handy tell for them when they were being watched. Hey, nope, Naruto answered, putting his free hand behind his head, 3 fingers held out, signaling that he felt at least 3 people. Shino remained silent, concentrating on the report his Kaikai had discovered, then spoke. "I has been curious. Do you think our Jonin sensei will be upset that the three of us assumed this mission without her permission?" "Of course she won't. The Hokage assigned it. What can she say?" Ino said dismissively, but confirming that they were all now aware of at least 3 Jonin around them. "Oi, you guys ever been to another hidden village?" Naruto asked causally, asking subtly that he wanted to know if either of them knew where these ninja were from. "I went to Kusa once. It was really strange, you know." "Aha, really? I didn't know that," Ino said wide-eyed. "I too was unaware of that," Shino said, both having now confirmed that they did not know where the ninja were from. A second later they were spared further subterfuge, when 3 identical men appeared on each side of them. They were all dressed in elegant and simplistic white tops and pants with black detailing. They each were also carrying black-bladed navinatas. "Ino-chan, take the ugly one," Naruto offered, glancing at the other 2. "No, you take the ugly one." Ino shot back with a snort, drawing her kodachi with a flourish. "Fine, I'll take the ugly one," Naruto relented, drawing a kunai and tightening his grip on the briefcase. "So, which one is the ugly one?" "If you are done with your routine," Shino said, throwing a pair of kunai, embedding themselves in the ground in front of the closet ninja. A second later, the explosive tags flared and exploded, providing cover to the 3 Konoha ninja to scatter and engage their own enemies. Shino was immediately forced to dodge as the ninja. He had attack lunged forward, his naginata spearing through the air where he had been. Twisting in the air, Shino landed adroitly and producing another pair of kunai backpedaled, defending against the flashing blade that was seeking his blood. Shino of course knew that fighting a naginata with kunai for any length of time was suicide, but all he wanted for the moment was for the man to focus on him while a small swarm of his kaikai moved to land on the ninja and drain his chakra. Sadly, the man seemed utterly unconcerned with such a tactic, as he wasn't slowing down and seemed to be moving even faster. Dodging a particularly vicious slice, Shino started forward, then skidded to a halt, the naginata already arching up and dropping down in a chopping motion. Shino brought his weapons up, the kunai crossing overhead to halt the descent. That proved sadly ineffective, and Shino had to throw himself to the side, while taking a deep slice in his jacket. Rolling to his feet and spinning around, a swarm of bugs flooded from his jacket to descend on the man. The mysterious ninja in response twirled his weapon, the rippling as bubbles of water encased the swarm heading to him. "Funny thing about bugs, they don't do much when they're trapped in water," the man said, smiling politely at him. Shino prepared for another attack, when suddenly he took a water attack from behind. Pitching forward, his head crashed painfully into the ground, and a second later, he was out cold. Ino charged forward, her kodachi coming around in a precise arc aimed to the mysterious man's ribs. With a dull thud, however, the blade met tempered wood as the man blocked her swing. With a sharp exhale of breath, Ino pivoted, her momentum swinging her back around with a noticeable whistling sound. Her blade gleamed as it whipped up at the man's face, only to has it also blocked by the staff portion of the naginata. The man shoved her weapon away, and Ino went with the momentum, spinning around before coming to a stop in a ready stance, her kodachi held parallel to the ground in front of her with both hands. "For one so young, you has a very good grasp of the basics," the man said politely before spinning his weapon around overhead while slipping into an even deeper fighting stance, the blade snapping into position pointing at her. "However, it will take more than the basics to defeat me." Ino hesitated for a moment, realizing he was being serious, and then darted forward. The blades clashed with a scraping noise as kodachi clashed against the naginata blade. They paused briefly, then Ino backpedaled, slightly unnerved by the look in his eye, her kodachi struggling to block his slashes. Skidding to a stop, Ino resettled her nerves and darted back in, aiming for his stomach, only to have him spin his naginata counterclockwise and pin her sword to the ground. A second later, Ino released the weapon and fell back as the blade sliced through the space where her head had just resided. Rolling to her feet, Ino dodged backward to avoid a spearing motion from that weapon. Coming to a stop, she found herself breathing heavy, eyes wide, gulping. Kami, he was faster than anything she had ever faced, and worse, he was actively trying to kill her. No, this won't do," the man said, and with a flick of his naginata tossed her the lost kodachi, which Ino caught out of reflex. "That's much better. Now let's try this again, shall we, dear?" Gulping, Ino shifted her weight, deciding to use her most powerful techniques. Channeling as much chakra as she dared into her kodachi, Ino dropped to a knee, driving the tip of the blade into the ground. Dance of the crashing dragon. The earth rumbled and then, with a loud crack, exploded upwards in a hail of rock. Ino, however, was already channeling even more chakra into her kodachi, and slipping it from the ground slashed out at him. Dance of the Midnight Tornado. A moment later a decent-sized tornado joined the earlier attack, obscuring her enemy even more. Ino wasn't taking any chances and moved to use her newest technique, Dance of the Setting Moon, which was B rank. Channeling chakra into her legs and to reinforce the blade, Ino jumped as high as she could while her sword quickly rose over her head. A moment later she came back down, the blade slashing down with unbelievable force for her size, attempting to slice the man in half. Only instead of slicing the man or his weapon in half, her blade crashed against the staff of the Naginata as it was held overhead. Ino's feet hit the ground and then a second later the man shoved her way with his weapon. Skidding to a stop, Ino looked up to find the man holding his Naginata at an angle with the blade pointed causally behind him at the ground. I am impressed too. Used the Tsukiyo-dori so well at such a young age speaks very well of your abilities. Thanks, Ino managed, breathing heavily, staring at his weapon before looking at him. Is that Naginata unbreakable? Oh my no, the man said, looking apologetic. Much like your Tsukiyo-dori technique, my weapon gains much of its impressive abilities from my chakra flowing through it. Gulping, Ino adjusted her grip on the kodachi, sweat trickling down the sides of her face, and then darted forward, only to have the man block as before. Ino noticed too late that he was holding it at the far end, and with a quick twisting motion, he brought the blade from the closer edge of the blade to the farther edge. Then, with a deft jerk of his Naginata, the man wrenched the kodachi from her hand. Ino gulped nervously and stared up at the man, doubting that he would offer her another chance at defeating him. So this was how she would die. Not that there was anything wrong with it. At least she had given her best, and obviously this man was insanely more powerful and skilled than she was. I applaud your skill. Very few apprentices are skilled enough to hold up so well, the man said politely, offering her a pleasant smile, bringing his Naginata up to rest across his shoulders. It also speaks highly of your sensei, Deko-san, and Konoha in general. Thanks, Ino offered uncertainly, staring at him in confusion. However, as a ninja I am sure you appreciate that I must complete my mission, and as such I cannot have you interfering with my fight with the boy in orange. Now minus Ino started to shout, turning to give him a warning, only to be blindsided with the blunt end of his staff. I take my leave of you, my dear, though I look forward to seeing how you blossom, the man said, walking past her as she collapsed and blacked out. Fighting two enemies was not something Naruto had expected, especially one strong enough to force him to drop the briefcase and place a foot on it while molding chakra to hold it in place so that he could use both hands. Not that it was doing much good, he couldn't even get the time to form a cave bunshine hell, he was too busy trying to defend against two Naginatas with nothing more than kunai. Growing frustrated, Naruto deflected an incoming Naginata blade, while he hurled another kunai wrapped in an exploding note at the man on the left. What he needed then was a quick win, but the only quick win he could manage would need two hands. The kamikaze no jutsu was out for the sheer fact that he wasn't sure how strong it actually was, and with Shino obviously out of the fight he didn't want to risk killing his own teammate. Deflecting another lunge of a Naginata aside, he aimed it this time toward the other man. The two clashed for a moment, and Naruto took the chance to drive both back with the last of his kunai and exploding notes. That would buy him enough time to form the Tora seal, which he did, filling the small area with a gust of wind that uprooted several trees. It also, much to his surprise, caused both men to explode into puddles of water. Okay, I was fighting watermen. Naruto asked in surprise, staring at the two puddles of water. Talk about unexpected, but damn, those guys had been freaking strong. A second later Naruto sensed an attack from behind, and realizing he had forgotten about the third man, spun. His eyes widened as he found a Naginata plunging directly for his chest. A wordless roar of surprise escaped Naruto as he brought his hands around and grasped the shaft of the Naginata, holding it at bay even as the tip dug ever so slightly into his flesh. You caught it, the man said, eyes widening in surprise, his arm straining to push past, but he only succeeded in causing Naruto to slide backward, the briefcase firmly trapped beneath his foot. Hey, not bad, Naruto said, meeting his gaze, struggling to keep the blade from going any further. It seemed the battle had come to a temporary halt as the two of them strained against each other, but Naruto knew this was no just a pathetic bandit, or even your typical Ronin. This was someone much more dangerous, much more murderous, someone that he most likely had very little chance against. You are quite talented, the man growled, his grey eyes narrowing. Do you has a name? Azumaki Naruto, he grated out, wincing as the Naginata tip slid just a fraction of an inch deeper into him. You Yasash's Isarabai, formerly of the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananin Shu, Isarabai said before suddenly yanking his Naginata back, pulling Naruto off balance. The blonde pitched forward, then reeled upright as the other end of the weapon smashed into his mouth, followed by a whistling sound as the blade slashed diagonally across his chest despite his desperate attempt to avoid it. Naruto's mind went dumb from the pain, then his legs were swept out from under him, sending him crashing to the ground, to watch in fascination as the Naginata plunged to his chest once more. Naruto reacted almost too late. The blade sank deeper than before, but Naruto had managed to catch the shaft of the weapon and held it tight, avoiding a certain death. "You are very attached to your life," Isarabai said conversationally, increasing the pressure on his weapon, succeeding in sliding the blade just a bit further. Naruto managed, eyes nearly closed from the effort it was taking to keep the weapon from plunging into him completely. "It will be my pleasure to kill you. I'm not dead yet," Naruto managed, and then, like he had figured out against Sasuke, used his body as a medium for the Kase no Yaiba. The wind actually seemed to howl in rage, the slashing blades of wind enveloping both him and his target. For a moment, he locked eyes with Isarabai, and then the man pulled his weapon away and disappeared, leaving Naruto lying alone on the ground bleeding. He could taste blood in his mouth, but he could also feel the unbearable heat that he had learned to associate with his body healing. Rolling over and getting up slowly, Naruto paused, watching as blood oozed in slow motion from his chest to pool on the ground beneath him. "Get up. Gotta get up." Naruto raised, and with a serve of strength, Naruto did just that, stumbling but remaining upright. Naruto took the moment to survey the area, finding it utterly devastated from his jutsu. There were deep cuts all through the ground where he had been pinned. Damn, just how strong was that move? "You impress me to not only survive my assault but to drive me back. Speaks highly of you," Isarabai said from the left, and when Naruto turned he found the man, his white clothes shredded, blood splattered, standing on the surface of the river, holding only what remained of his Naginata underarm tip pointed down. "I has never seen such a jutsu. Tell me, Uzumaki Naruto, does it has a name?" "Kamikaze no Yaiba," Naruto answered, drawing his breath in a thick wet gulp. "A very worthy name," Isarabai intoned, and then spun his broken weapon around before holding it before him. "Allow me to present my own technique, Suten, Usuki Dariru. It has proven undefeatable save for once against a technique known as the Rasengan." Naruto froze, eyes wide, watching as the man began his move. The tip of the Naginata spun around him gracefully, trailing through the surface of the river, bring up ever-growing trails of water. The weapon began to spin around faster, the trails of water growing in size, following the gleaming blade in the spinning dance. Instinct told Naruto that this technique, whatever it was called, was not something he needed to let the man complete. If the only move to defeat it was the Rasengan, then that was what he would use. Creating a cave bunshine, Naruto had it begin molding the chakra in the palm of his right hand, then once the sphere was completed, had it grasp his wrist and spin, hurling him at his enemy. Isarabi's eyes widened slightly and then began twirling his weapon faster before suddenly slashing the blade through the air. The swirling trails of water followed the slash, merging into a massive spiraling ball as it hurtled toward him. Naruto roared in rage and brought his hand forward, clashing the Rasengan against the mass of water. His airborne advance halted, Naruto's feet hit the water, and slid backward amid a rooster trail from the impact. A moment later, he braced against the water's surface and surfed forward, digging the Rasengan deep into the blast of water, shattering it. The explosion sent him skidding backward along the water's surface once more, with another rooster's trail followed by a spray of water as it descended back to the river. Coming to a stop, Naruto struggled to remain standing, then collapsed to a knee. It wasn't until he saw the water darkening with his blood that he realized that his attack had worsened the wound his body was trying to heal. Still, he lifted his head, meeting the silent and odd man he had been fighting, daring him silently to continue the assault. "This fight is over," Isarabai intoned, staring at Naruto in dark consideration. "You may keep the money. But no, this is Uzumaki Naruto. We will fight again someday." Tsunade led the way through the maze of streets, before making their way parallel to a medium river, where a small building sat, along with a dog and a waiting ferry. Adjusting the weight of the still unconscious boy she had slung over her shoulder, the Sanin was very aware of the high no Kuni samurai that were escorting them. "Oh Basin, why are we going by ferry?" INO asked softly from beside her, eyes glancing around intently. "Well, considering the fact that you three were assaulted by a mist ninja, wielding a Naginata, I'd say it'd be faster than walking," Tsunade retorted sourly, more than a little disappointed in her niece's inability to do more in a fight. Though she was also disappointed with Shino's and even Naruto's stupidity over taking such blows. Right, INO said, scowling, so why are we going to a place he'd be at home attacking? Tsunade-sama, INO is correct, the ninja used water-based attacks, Shino said quietly from beside her, carrying the new briefcase of money courtesy of the governor since Naruto had inadvertently destroyed the first one. He therefore is at home attacking from the water. Because it's the last thing he'd expect to now stay here and keep an eye on him. Tsunade answered, setting Naruto down before moving forward alone to the building to speak with the owner. Is the ferry ready to go? Yes, the man said. A quick glanced over her shoulder, and then back at her. The governor stressed the importance of being ready. Are all of you going? No, just 4 of us will be using it, Tsunade said sourly. Me 2 weaklings and 1 idiot. This ferry has a private area, right? I'll need to scan the idiot for poison. Of course, the man said, slightly indignant. The crew's already on board and waiting. The governor's covered the expense, so whenever you're ready just go. Great, Tsunade said, turning to glare at the 2 other ninja hovering near Naruto. You 2 get that runt on board. Then set yourselves up as lookouts on the front and rear of the boat, and this time try not to get blindsided. Ino's face flushed but bent, and with the help of Shino pulled Naruto to his feet and dragged the limp body to the boat. Snorting in annoyance, Tsunade slung her furoshiki over her shoulder and followed them aboard. Nodding to the captain, she checked to find Shino already at the forefront of the ferry, then headed to the cabin only to find Ino standing in the doorway. Tsunade Basin High. Well minus. Save it, Tsunade said sourly, glowering at the guilty-looking girl. I heard you and your team were good. Oh Shino, he's top-notch at thinking ahead, and there's Ino, one of our top kunoichi genin, and Naruto. He's held off Orochimaru and saved the whole village single-handed. He's a hero. That's all true though. Ino protested. No, the only thing true is that Naruto is a hero, Tsunade said, her gaze darkening. He's a tragedy waiting to happen. Oh bar minus. Will you stop calling me that? Tsunade snapped, her temper breaking and forcing the girl to shrink back. I couldn't possibly be related to someone as pathetic as you. Kami, you got your asses kicked by a group of Mizu Bunshine and let a friend, someone important to you, get seriously injured. Naruto-kun has the Tenkei Joe, Ino protested weakly, and he healed quickly, didn't he? He'll be fine. Girl, rapid healing has serious side effects, even a bloodline. Besides which, that weapon most likely was coated with a strong and high concentration of poison. Tsunade snorted, shaking her head in annoyance, pulling the girl out of her way. Now leave me alone so I can see if I can keep the hero from dying just yet. But minus Ino started to protest before Tsunade slammed the door behind her. Letting out a deep breath, the medic dropped her furoshiki in a corner of the dim interior. Crossing the cramped cabin, she sat down heavily on the small chair beside the cot, pausing as she noticed the forehead protector on the small table, and a damp rag on Naruto's forehead. Obviously, an inept attempt by Ino at tending to an unconscious Naruto. Snorting, she removed it, before allowing her fingers brush through his bangs. He looked so much like Nawaki and the Yondem. He also looked odd without that forehead protector. Gathering her will, Tsunade removed his blood-stained jacket. At least it was dried blood, so her hands didn't shake that badly. Then, when he was beret-chested, she frowned. Admittedly, she didn't know the exact details concerning this Tenkei ability, but there should have been scars. According to Shino, the Naginata had struck Naruto repeatedly, and even healing abilities Hosuzu Seisei included minus had to leave a faint sign. Instead, there was nothing, just smooth and unblemished skin. Well, enough about his flesh. It was the poison she needed to take care of. Flashing through a series of seals, her hand began to glow a greenish blue, and she placed it on his body. Tsunade was expecting to find a system fighting a very high level of poison, but instead she found nothing. The medical jutsu she was using to check Naruto's body reported that he was perfectly healthy. That of course was impossible, since nobody was perfectly healthy, especially a boy that had by all accounts taken several Naginata attacks to the chest, rapidly healed both wounds and poison. Even with an advanced bloodline that allowed to healing, like Ino claimed, there should have been mutations to his cellular structure. If her scan was accepted, this Tenkei healed him and left no mutation beyond. No, Tsunade decided, sitting back from the unconscious ninja on the cot, it didn't heal him. Regenerated would be a more accurate term. But it did more than merely regenerate perfectly, it made him stronger, harder to injure in that location. No advanced bloodline could do that, the human body simply didn't work that way. There was no explanation for it, The ability was just too unnatural to be an advanced bloodline. It was then a horrible thought flooded through her, made her eyes widen in horror and knowledge, made her heart bleed and her breath stop at what the thought meant. Her wide brown eyes settled on the boy's peaceful face, mind shrieking the only explanation possible. Uzumaki Naruto, son of the Yondem Hokage, did not has an advanced bloodline. An Univertsu. It was an Univertsu. Uzumaki Naruto, the boy who dreamed of being the next Hokage, was a Jinchurikai. The forest was quiet, still, in the gathering dark of the night. The only sound was that of heavy breathing as an elegant man dressed in white clothes stained red, sat applying healing herbs to his wounds. He wasn't in too bad of shape overall. Who would have believed a child dressed in orange could stand before him? Uzumaki Naruto was an odd one. He could use wind-based jutsu without hand seals, could apparently heal without thought, and he could use the Rasengan. Oh yes, Naruto was not a normal kid, and Yasashi's Isarabai very much looked forward to killing the boy in a true fight. No silly ambushes. No squabbling over money. Just him, Isarabai of the Kiri no Shinobigatan Ananin Shu, against Uzumaki Naruto of Konohagako no Sato. Finishing his application of healing herbs, he took a deep breath, and then let it out before looking at the shattered shaft of his naginata. Picking it up, he thumbed the worn wood, knowing that it had been about time he replaced the staff, but he felt bad. Still, with deft movements he removed the blade and tossed the shattered wood aside. Before anything he had to find a fitting replacement. Climbing to his feet, the swordsman looked around the forest curiously. Mostly it was kakashi, which traditionally was selected to its strength, durability, and the fact that it compressed slightly at the point of impact, to ensure it did not bend, crack, or splinter. Isarabai, however, preferred Sunyuke, which had all the same properties as kakashi, but was slightly heavier and denser. He strolled silently among the trees and roots looking for just right piece of wood until startled by a voice from a few feet behind him. Isarabai-sama, it is a pleasure to see one such as yourself. Turning quickly prepared in case it was a mist hunter nin, he instead found someone dressed in the typical Konoha Unbu outfit. Except for the mask, it looked odd, a normal face with 6 simple marks over each eye. There was also a lack of emotions, a total blank spot, and Isarabai knew this was not the typical Black Ops ninja. Bonsauru, the former mist ninja, said politely, watching for any sign of attack. I am afraid you has me at a disadvantage. You know who I am, but I cannot say the same of you. So sorry, my name is not important, the figure said, but you may call me Hyria. Very well, Hyria-san, Isarabai said politely. What exactly brings you out here so late at night? Better still, where are you from exactly? I am a member of an organization, I cannot say which, within Konoha. I am here, of course, to speak with the elegant monster of the mist and to make an offer that you may find beneficial. Isarabai kept his immediate reaction, to attack and then flee in the confusion in check. After all, if this man was on the up and up, which he seemed to be, then this could be a good thing for him. With a subtle move that Hyria didn't miss, he motioned to the man to continue. I work for a group within Konoha that seeks to bring unity to the land. To do this we are willing to offer you an alliance if you will help us. Hyria paused, then seeing the lack of objection continued. We has many enemies opposed to our efforts, enemies that we may not be in a position to properly neutralize at the moment. So we ask humble, that if you would lend us your strength, then when the time is right, in exchange we will repay your kindness in whatever manner you wish. So in other words, Isarabai said slowly, considering the offer carefully, if I remove these obstacles that you are unable to at the moment, you will repay me with whatever I ask for. How, is there something you would ask for? Yes, Isarabai said slowly, eyes almost glowing in anticipation. I wish to fight Uzumaki Naruto alone in a proper fight. If you can grant me that, I will happily remove whatever obstacles you place before me. I believe an arrangement can be made. Hyria said, then reaching into the cloak he wore produced a scroll, offering it to Isarabai. If you do not mind, this is the matter we need handled now. We are in delicate negotiations with a very important figure within Konoha, and this could greatly help us. Taking the scroll, the former mist ninja read what was written inside, and then nodded, looking up at Hyria. Let me repair my weapon and you'll have Daffy's head on a pike by the morning. Chapter 27, Team 10. Naruto woke up with a throbbing in his temples and a slight stiffness in his left arm, most likely from where he had been sleeping on it. Grunting, the blonde rolled onto his back, staring up at the dingy ceiling. He couldn't quite remember everything, but he knew that he was alive and hence apparently in friendly territory. Scowling, Naruto flashed back to the fight against that Isarabai guy. He had the impression that not too much time had passed between then and now, but rather than start jumping about he instead thought of the fight. It had, in all honesty, not been one of his better fights. Hell, he had only just barely managed to keep from being killed, and it had taken a random jutsu to drive the man off. Who the hell was that Isarabai? Who were the Kiri no Shinobi Katana Nananin? Why had that guy backed off after Naruto used the Rasengan when before that he had been so excited every time Naruto countered him? Shaking his head, a bad idea, Naruto sat up to take in the room. Obviously it wasn't the most lavish of places, but wasn't meager, more comfortable than anything. Still he was slightly worried about the lack of signs of his team, which instantly put him on his guard. He was just contemplating his lack of weapons when the door opened and an oblivious Yamanaka INO entered carrying a tray with 2 steaming bowls. The scent, however, made his mouth water. It was unbelievable. She had miso ramen. Gah! INO shouted, nearly upsetting the tray before steadying it and glaring at him. These don't scare me like that, Naruto-kun. Ah, sorry INO-chan. Naruto offered, scratching the back of his head. INO paused, stared at him and then blinked. Naruto, sensing the sudden change, watched as the girl knelt and set her tray aside. She stared at him for a few more minutes, then carefully reached out to poke his forehead. You're awake. Well, yeah, Naruto said, blinking. I mean, sure, I took some of those stupid cuts, but I heal fast, remember. I know, but well, Tsunade-san said that the weapon might have been poisoned, INO explained, looking more relieved by the minute. I was worried you would die in your sleep. Bow, I gotta be Hokage before I'll die, Naruto said, flashing her a smile before blinking. So where is Shino and Baba? Oi, plus, where the hell are we? Idioto. No, we're in Otafuki. Shino and Tsunade-san are delivering the money for her gambling debts, INO said, shaking her head and picking up a bowl handed it to him. Along with chopsticks. I'm supposed to stay behind and keep an eye on you. Tsunade-san isn't very happy with any of us, especially me. Why? Naruto asked, eyes wide, ramen falling back into the bowl. Why not? We kept the bastard from taking the money minus. You got hurt, and we couldn't do anything. Especially me, INO said with a shrug. We let our teammate nearly get killed, when if we were just a little bit stronger, he wouldn't have had to fight alone. That's stupid, Naruto said with a scowl. That guy was crazy strong minus. No, she's right, INO admitted, morosely picking at her ramen. I was never meant to be a combat type. Infiltration and information is my specialty. Yeah, but we didn't have a chance for that, Naruto argued back, glaring at her. There were 3 of them and we each had to fight one. Naruto-kun, I appreciate what you're saying to do, but I couldn't get close to him. I shouldn't have been placed on this mission. Without my sword I'm mostly useless. So, learn how to fight without your sword, Naruto said, unable to believe this was the INO from the academy. That INO had always been sure of things, confident in her abilities and talent. This one seemed to doubt the usefulness she served on this time in a fight. Oi, if you want I can show you a ninjutsu Anko taught me. What good would that do? INO asked blankly. Well, it's called the Kanashibari no Jutsu, Naruto explained, excitement creeping into his voice as the idea he had took shape. It freezes a person in their tracks, and I think, if you concentrate hard enough, you can use it stop someone's heart. I haven't tried it yet. But you cold give it a shot. INO blinked, then set her meal down. Naruto-kun, I appreciate the thought, but I'm not sure I could learn that. Oh come on, Naruto said, brushing her protest off before stuffing ramen into his mouth. Abba lunch okay? When she nodded, he focused entirely on his meal, trying to remember all the details he could about the technique. After the first few times of using it, Naruto had gotten to the point where it was pure instinct, like all his techniques now. Still, he could vaguely remember the details and he'd make up the rest as he went. Turning back to his meal, he grinned at her, slurping his ramen up as she rolled her eyes and began eating as well. So what's Otafuki guy like? Naruto asked after a moment, stirring his broth absently. Well, it's nowhere near the size of Idioto, and the biggest industry seems to be gambling and the pleasure district. INO explained darkly, arching an eyebrow at him. Speaking of Idioto, why were you so tense there? Eh? Naruto managed, then silently considered how best to answer that question. Well, she was his teammate, so maybe he needed to tell her. Considering it, he shook his head and met her gaze later when Shino's here. Okay, INO relented, though she studied him intently for several long moments before sighing. So how are you going to teach me this ninjutsu? Oh, Naruto said, perking up happily. We'll go up to the roof and I'll create some cave bunshine for you to practice on. Well, after I restock my weapons. Shino thought about that, INO said, pointing at a nearby pouch full of fresh kunai, exploding notes, caltrops, and shuriken. We all restocked. Though Obasan said it was a waste of resources. Oh. Thanks. Naruto said, grabbing the pouch, then eyed his jacket, resigned that he would have to patch it. Springing up, he grinned down at her, stretching. Well, let's get this show on the road. 10 minutes later, both ninja were standing on the rooftop, the sun setting on the far edge of the city. Naruto stretched yet again and then created two cave bunshine, who smiled brightly at INO. The real Naruto walked away, then turned back facing INO and the two cave bunshine. Right. So for now just watch K. Then at INO's nod, one of the cave bunshine charged him, a kunai coming up, lunging toward his face. Without moving or flinch, Naruto struck with the kanashibari, freezing the attacking cave bunshine in place, the kunai an inch from his face. Stepping away, he grinned to startled INO. See, he'll be frozen in this position for 5 minutes. Anyway, the secret. Oh. You sort of project your chakra at the target. I do what? Well, Naruto mused, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. You mold your chakra and then you throw it at the target. Kinda like a spear or kunai, anyway you throw it at the arms and legs or that sort of thing. Right, INO drawled dubiously, then faced her own cave bunshine, who started jumping up and down and waving his arms. Naruto felt the serve of chakra, then felt it scatter and shook his head. INO, scowling, tried again, only two has the same result. 20 minutes later, she still had no luck, and an hour later was the same story. I can't do this. INO huffed, crossing her arms and glaring at a bored Naruto who was busy practicing with his kunai and the second cave bunshine. Maybe we're doing this wrong, the Naruto cave bunshine offered, dodging a throw from the real Naruto. Probably. The real Naruto admitted, turning to match her stare. He really wasn't sure why she wasn't getting it, just that her chakra would build and then scatter when she tried to hurl it. Scowling, he thought about it for several long minutes before realizing that her problem resembled his with the Rasengan, and then a devious thought came to mind. Naruto-kun, why are you smiling like that? INO asked, her tone worried, and then yelped as the two Naruto clones suddenly attacked her with kunai. INO backpedaled, instinctively going for her sword, only to remember she had left it and her weapons behind at Naruto's prompting. Dodging the first lunge and shoving that Naruto away, she glared at the now laughing real Naruto. I'm going to kill you. Not if they get you first. Naruto laughed, nodding at the cave bunshine, who were now attacking in unison. They moved in sync, weaving back and forth, in front of each other before one lunged, blade gleaming in the moonlight. INO stepped to the side, the kunai coming within inches of her side, and dropped an elbow on its head. She was caught flat-footed, however, as the second one used the first one as a springboard and caught her in the mouth with a kick. Tumbling backward from the blow, INO regained her feet, eyes wide as the two Narutos charged her yet again. This time INO went on the offensive, landing a kick to the first one's face, followed by a punch at the other. Only this time the second clone grabbed her arm and swung her around, throwing her to the ground. INO sprang up easily, panting, and then she felt the killer intent. It was frightening and it was directed at her. She was nearly impaled by a kunai that was flying at her head, but she managed to grab the weapon and nail its user with another throw. The cave bunshine disappeared in a puff of smoke and the killer intent doubled, making INO collapse on her ass in fright. A second later the other cave bunshine came charging through the smoke, and jumped, hurling weapons down at her. INO nimble rolled and dodged each blade, though they came closer and closer, until she regained her feet. Landing, the Naruto didn't waste the energy to recenter himself and instead shot toward her at full speed, a kunai swinging back for an overhand stab. INO panicked, this one wasn't playing and it was moving too fast for her to counter or avoid. Gathering her chakra, the details of Naruto's face so clear, she focused everything she had into the blow and projected as big a chakra dagger as she could. The Naruto in question suddenly jerked back from the blow, kunai dropping from his hand, and then with a loud pop disappeared. INO of course collapsed to her knees, hands on the rooftop, gasping for air. The adrenaline rush was intense, but as it subsided, she felt her shoulders shaking as the image of shock and surprise on Naruto's face replayed through her mind. Logically she knew it had been a cave bunshine, nothing more and nothing less, but it had been so real at the time. The intent, her desire to live, the fact that it was Naruto. When she felt a hand on her shoulder she thirked and looked up to find him crouching next to her. His eyes were apologetic, but there seemed to be a look of pride on his face. INO, however, did the only thing she could do, and slapped the taste out of his mouth, knocking him on his ass. Ow! You bastard! Ino shouted, glaring at him. Do you realize what that was like? I killed you. I'll never get that image out of my head now. Oi, but Ino-chan, you did it, Naruto said, getting up, rubbing his cheek. You used the Kanashibari no Jutsu and beat my cave Bunshine in one shot. I don't care. Ino shouted at him, standing as well. Ino-chan, it was just a minus. Naruto, Ino said sharply, fixing him with a glare that made him pause. I saw you die, I killed you. Excuse me if I'm not jumping around the joy that I learned a ninjutsu at the expense of having the memory of your face at the moment of death engraved into my memory. Naruto blinked, opened his mouth, and then fell silent. Somehow, he instinctively knew better than to admit that he had actually felt some of the pain his cave Bunshine had felt. Still, he needed to say something, but he didn't know what her problem was now. I just thought, your problem was concentration. So if I had them attack you for real, that you'd solve it. Just, paused and looked away. Just leave me alone. Ino-chan, Naruto said, and then feeling her annoyance, frowned before doing as she asked. Slipping quietly into the inn, Shino nodded briefly at the man behind the desk, then started up the stairs. After the last few hours with Tsunade running all over the city to pay off her debts, he was more than ready to rest. Unless Ino was tending to a still unconscious Naruto, in that case he would have to resign himself to another rant. Ino apparently took Tsunade's disdain for their skill hard. Which was understandable. Ino had been idolizing her great aunt for a while now. Shino, on the other hand, accepted that Tsunade had an unbelievably high standard, which was unsurprising considering her history. Shino also knew that while both he and Ino had not performed up to standards expected to combat, they were making steady progress. Both of them had originally been information-gathering type ninja, and they remained geared toward that. Only Naruto was predisposed toward combat and had been trained in that way. So when Tsunade had let her disdain for his fighting skills bleed through, he ignored her and calmly pointed out what his purpose was supposed to be on the team. Gathering information first, combat second, and his priorities would not change. Tsunade took this with a curt nod and a muttered comment about people knowing their strengths. Shaking his head, Shino entered the room and paused, finding a conscious Naruto sitting on the futon and patching his jacket. More interesting was the fact that he was alone. Shino had been sure Ino would be present in this situation. Putting that aside, Shino entered the room completely and closing the door moved to his own futon. Oi, you and Baba has fun? Naruto asked, not looking up from his efforts at repairing the tattered jacket. Fun would not be the term to use, Shino responded. We met with several individuals and paid off her massive gambling debts. I, however, learned much about her personality and this city. Naruto grunted at this, which was rather unusual, but didn't look up from his efforts. Shino watched the boy intently, eyebrows drawing together in thought before finally speaking. Has something occurred? Ho? Naruto asked, looking up. Then realizing what Shino asked, shook his head. Now, just trying to patch my jacket up. I see, Shino said, frowning behind the high collar of his jacket. And Ino. Out. Is she aware that you are awake? Shino asked, almost scowling, though it went unseen. Well, yeah, Naruto said, shrugging as he went back to work on his jacket. We trained together for a bit after I got up, and then she asked me to leave her alone, so I did. Why did she ask you to leave? No, Naruto said with a shrug. I was teaching her the Kanashibari no Jutsu, but she was having a hard time with it, so I had my cave Bunshine attack her. After she used it to kill one, Ino-chan freaked out on me. That is odd, Shino said. Did you say something inappropriate? No. Naruto said, forcefully looking up at him. All I did was help her out. Then she's freaking out about seeing the face of my cave Bunshine when it died. That does seem a tad unreasonable, Shino agreed. Did you apologize? Sometimes it is best to apologize even if he did nothing wrong. I tried, but she just kept shouting about the cave Bunshine. Then she demanded I leave her alone, so I did. I failed to see why she is upset then. Shino said, shaking his head, scowling in thought about why Ino would react in such a way to a perfectly normal way of training. Oi, I know why, Naruto said darkly, turning back to his jacket. Cause she's a girl and girls are crazy. For once I agree with your decision. Ino couldn't help but pace restlessly on the small rooftop where Naruto had left her. How could has done that to her? Didn't he understand what it was like to see a friend's face at the moment of death? Ino had seen it and it haunted her, made her wish that it could be erased from her memory, but even Yamanaka techniques couldn't accomplish that. Fisting her forehead, she grumbled softly, then sat down heavily on the edge of the roof. It was partial her fault though. If she had just been able to concentrate, he wouldn't have tried to help her like that. It wasn't that INO hadn't tried, it was just that Tsunade's doubt in her skill made it impossible for her to concentrate on anything. Snorting in annoyance, the young woman propped her chin in her hands and stared out over the city. At first, when she had been given this mission, INO had been excited because she would be traveling with her aunt, the famous medical Sanin. It was a dream come true for INO, and the blonde had wondered what, if anything, she could talk her aunt into teaching her. Then that had fallen through, after she had went against the man with the naginata. She had lost, and nearly got her team annihilated. Shino tried to explain that because they were originally information-gathering types and hence were making up for lost time at combat. INO knew the truth though, they were pathetic. Naruto did all the fighting, the Kumo Aiki, Akagahara, the Chunin exams, Gaara, and that wasn't even counting the fact that he had held off Orochimaru of the Sanin for a few minutes utterly alone. Just what good did she do for this team? Hell, what good was her knowing Kenbutsu? Who had she ever fought and defeated? INO was tempted to give up on the Kenbutsu, it would easy, but her pride wouldn't let her. She had worked hard, harder than she ever had to gain the abilities she now had. Then there was honoring her sensei's memory. He had entrusted her with continuing his Kenbutsu style. No, she couldn't give up, but it still didn't mean she was any good. INO need to work harder, much harder, to prove that she wasn't useless. Maybe if she asked very nicely, Tsunade might agree at least to teach her a basic medical jutsu. Yawning, the Kunoichi started to get up. She needed to talk to Naruto. He wasn't exactly big on understanding other people's emotions. Plus, if nothing else, Naruto could and would at least teach her another useful move. A moment later, however, there was an almost unnoticeable spike of chakra and INO rolled backward out of instinct. Coming up in a crouch out of view of the street below her, INO added to her balance with a hand on the rooftop before her. Edging her way forward, INO cautiously peered over the edge of the rooftop down to the street. There was her aunt, who was half turned facing someone who was partially in the shadows. INO squinted slightly in the gloom, trying to make out more details. Whoever they were, they appeared to be wearing hakama pants and a dark long-sleeved top. More telling, of course, was the white mask that so resembled the Unbu masks that she had seen. Obviously, whoever this was, they were highly talented and determined to keep their identity secret. Tsunade-sama, the figure said, their voice just barely reaching INO. Who the hell are you? Tsunade returned a tad louder, though INO still had to strain her hearing and control her breathing. Sadly, the wind shifted, making it impossible to hear to the moment. A second later, the wind died and INO felt her mouth compress into a thin line at what she heard. As a sign of faith, we has removed those who would dishonor you by demanding money and wounding your comrades. If you decide to help us in our cause, then we shall help you as it is needed. If you decline, then we lose a vaunted ally. The phrasing was so odd. The message of course was clear, but who exactly were they? Why were they approaching Tsunade of all people and like this in secret? It just didn't make any sense. Still, INO forced the message to the back of her mind, focusing on the conversation. Tsunade was saying something what INO couldn't tell since the wind had kicked up and was now carrying the words away from her once more. The figure responded softly with something that sounded like very well, but she couldn't swear to it. Then her eyes, trained to detect high-speed movement, saw the figure dart away into the night. INO waited another moment, then quietly slipped away, needing to discuss this with her two teammates. Tsunade was in a foul mood when she finally entered the inn, mainly because she had been denied access to her favorite gambling centers because of her debt. Then she'd been forced to deal with a fool that assumed she was a working girl he'd recover in a few months, so she didn't feel too bad. Then, after a night of drinking and sourly thinking about the three she was traveling with, a mysterious person had approached her. They had dressed like an old-style Unbu, though the face mask reminded her more of a mist hunter nin. They were slight, and though they were talented, obviously only Chunin level. Tsunade guessed it was more manner of speech than anything that they had been a young male, maybe 14 or 15 years old. His message weighed heavily on her mind, though there were only a few key phrases that jumped out at her. Within Konoha we lack unity. Your aid in helping us to achieve this goal. If you decline, then we lose a vaunted ally. She had only heard of unity in passing upon her return, no real details, but this unsettled her. To make such an approach was not something anyone would have expected, plus there was the underlying threat implied in that last line. Tsunade had of course declined the offer. She was a Sanin and she wasn't afraid. Besides, if they did move against her, she could potentially gain more information. Whoever they sent would be strong, though they would most likely underestimate her as most male ninja did, but by fighting him she would be able to figure out who he really was. Of course that was a large gamble considering the handicaps she was under, an overrated team and her fear of blood. Dried blood she could handle if she was truly enraged enough, she could even handle fresh blood, provided she didn't notice it getting on her. Still, the die was cast and she would handle things as they fell. Staring up the stairs, she was left with only one real problem: Naruto. Uzumaki Naruto, who had set her into this position because of his sheer desire and determination to be Hokage, had so forcibly reminded Tsunade of how important people. Naruto, the son of the Yondem Hokage who she had encouraged to take the job, who also happened to be a Jinchurikai. Tsunade still couldn't believe it, after all of the Yondem speeches about how immoral and wrong it was to condemn children to such a fate. His violent reaction to hearing that Suna had created one that he would in turn make his own. Obviously it was the Kyubi no Yoko that Naruto held in check that granted him that Onivatsu of regeneration. Tsunade wasn't even sure what she could do or say. Who else knew? Freya would obviously know, perhaps Anko, but not his teammates. Tsunade felt that even Naruto might have only recently learned of his status. Should she bring it up with him? But the discussion would lead into dangerous territory about the nature of Jinchurikai and how they were treated. Shaking her head, Tsunade resolved to leave the matter alone for the moment. She would talk with Freya first. Reaching the hallway, she came to a stop, spotting the boy that had been occupying her thoughts leaning against the wall outside his room. He had those eyes fixed on her, and even in this dim hallway, Tsunade knew he wouldn't miss anything she did. "You're up," Tsunade said, cautiously walking to the door to her room. "We need to talk." "You know," Tsunade drawled, being the blonde in the dark hallway, "I think idiots who let their teammates get hurt should be seen and not heard." "We got hurt," Naruto countered in a tight voice, "because we were guarding your money, Baba." Tsunade shook her head, not even willing to get worked up over such a comment. The boy was young, brash, and didn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, despite what people thought. "Who are the Kiri no Shinobigatana Nananinshu?" Naruto asked after a moment of silence, eyes almost glowing in the dim light of the hallway. "An elite group of mist swordsmen, Momoki Zabuza Hoshigeki Kisum Kurisuki Reiga Yasashis Isarabai, Uchavini Tenbetsu Yamin Hachi and Kasime. Each one is Jonin level and the 5 surviving members are A rank or higher, missing ninja." Tsunade answered with a sigh, crossing her arms and resigned to answering such pointless questions. "Okay," Naruto said slowly, eyeing Tsunade closely. "Tell me about Isarabai. Is that the name of the one you guys fucked up against?" Tsunade asked with a snort, then seeing Naruto's glare shook her head. "He's called the Elegant Monster of the Mist, and he used to use a dao, but changed to the Naginata. But that's not a sword. You know, I remember someone else saying that. They were the 3rd candidate to the Yondem Hokage title, and the guy mentioned that Isarabai wasn't a swordsman since he used it. Isarabai flayed him like a fish." "Oh, so if he's so strong, then why the hell are you giving us a hard time?" Naruto asked curtly and a tad forcefully. "If he can fill it a Hokage candidate, I think to tune in and a genin driving him off is a big deal." "First off," Tsunade said, glaring at him, "he was not actively seeking to kill you 3. Second, you were the only one that drove him away, the others lost to his Mizu Bunshine who are 1/10 of his strength. In other words, they were pushovers, but that doesn't matter since he will be focusing on you from now on." "He mentioned we'd met again," Naruto said blandly. "Met? Once he meets someone he can't kill, he starts obsessing, he goes to any length to kill them, and the longer he goes without killing them the worse he gets." "Shit!" Naruto exclaimed in surprise. Tsunade continued darkly, ignoring that outburst, "And finally, when the Sanin were your age we could has killed him easy." "Well, we're not you," Naruto countered just as darkly. "This is Team 10. I'll admit that it wasn't my best fight ever, but the next time I face him he won't walk away." "You keep telling yourself that, and maybe one day it'll be true," Tsunade said, opening her door, glaring at him, "but probably only after you've lost your whole team. Keep that in mind, little boy. A hero is only a hero because he's gotten everyone else killed." "Is that what you think, Baba?" Naruto asked thickly, anger rich in his voice. "So you're saying all those important people of yours got people killed?" "You don't get it," Tsunade started angrily before being cut off. "Oi, I get things fine," Naruto shouted, his eyes narrowing. "You're a cold-hearted, self-righteous bitch hag. You think a hero gets everyone killed? You think a Hokage is a joke? You're not only insulting me, but everyone you ever loved that dreamed of being Hokage. Tsunade almost recoiled from the hostility in his voice, the sheer loathing in his tone. Of course she wanted to would object, but to a moment she felt as if Dan and Nawaki were shouting at her. Calling her those names, telling her the same thing as Naruto was shouting. Recovering, Tsunade prepared to shout back but found the hallway empty, just her and the cursed necklace she wore. It felt like a boulder around her neck, and reaching up the Sannin clutched it tightly. After a moment's deliberation she pulled it off, crying, realizing that it was not hers to wear. Naruto had shown just how deeply being Hokage meant to him, his spirit echoing too loudly of Dan and her younger brother. This would be the last time she entrusted this necklace to anyone. When Naruto died, then the necklace went with him. Tsunade would not be able to bear the weight of the curse after that. Turning, she opened the door and stepped inside. By the morning she would have recovered her veneer of disdain. As she lay on her futon that night she cried to her lost family. Naruto landed adroitly on the rooftop, mind awash in the various pieces of information that he now possessed. Glancing around he noted that Shino was the only one present, but that he appeared absorbed with his bugs. That meant Shino had found something and INO had gone to investigate, giving Naruto a moment to think about what he had learned. Sitting down on the rooftop, Naruto crossed his arms, scowling. He didn't really understand that hag's problem who went around spouting about how a hero got others killed. She was seriously fucked up in the head if she thought like that. A hero didn't get others killed, he stopped others from being killed. His scowl deepened as he thought more and more about that conversation. He had meant every word. Still he couldn't help but wonder what was up with that hag. Shaking it off, he instead turned to the facts he had learned about the man that had attacked them yesterday, Yasashi's Isarabai. Naruto felt almost excited at the thought of having such a person trying to kill him. It proved Naruto was strong, but he could already see the downside. A man that got obsessed the longer he went without killing his target. Oh yeah, that was a good thing for a future Hokage to have. There was no telling when that bastard would show back up. Still, at least now he knew how to at least help INO accept her defeat. An A-rank missing ninja was not something any of them should be facing. Adding that, along with his own defeat, should at least help INO get over the loss. Though he was still unclear as to why she had freaked out on him earlier during the cave Bunshine training. Scowling even more, the Chunin thought long and hard about certain things she had said. I saw you die, I killed you. The memory of your face at the moment of death. It was like a bolt of lightning struck him as he realized the problem. His cave Bunshine had looked like him, so she was upset because of seeing his face as he died. Obviously Naruto realized, eyes wide, INO didn't like seeing him hurt. He remembered the forest of death, the concern she had shown for him being hurt after his fight against that snake bastard. Hadn't she said that he was more important than Sasuke? Hence if she cared that much about him being hurt, seeing him die would have to be horrible. He sat there, utterly surprised at such a concept. Then he tried to play it off, or talk it around so that he was just overthinking things, but no, it was obvious now. She considered him important enough that even seeing his cave Bunshine die was enough to upset her. I'm back, INO suddenly said, and Naruto jerked, almost falling over at her silent arrival. INO didn't seem to notice as she moved to sit down with them, her eyes hard. There was no hint of her normal attitude, which told him that whatever she had learned was serious. What did you learn? Shino asked, apparently rejoining the conversation. The boy's name is Haku. INO said he's working with someone named Zabuza. I didn't have much time since he started waking up as soon as I entered his mind, so I had to get out of there. Zabuza. Naruto repeated, mind flashing to the names Tsunade had told him. No, that would be too much of a coincidence. That would only happen with an author that just didn't care about being called uncreative. Yeah, INO said with a slight nod. At least we now has names, Shino offered before a soft buzz filled the air. Perhaps INO should tell us once more of the message she overheard between Tsunade-sama and this Haku. As a sign of faith, we has removed those who would dishonor you by demanding money and wounding your comrades. If you decide to help us in our cause, then we shall help you as it is needed. If you decline, then we lose a vaunted ally. Oi, is that everything? Naruto asked, frowning slightly. That's all I could hear, INO admitted with a frown, which isn't much but still. Obviously the meeting is strange, Shino allowed, nodding slightly. That last line is obviously a threat on her life. Ho. You sure? Naruto asked, glancing at the boy curiously. Considering the nature of the message and the timing of the meeting, yes. Damn it, Naruto grumbled before looking at INO. Okay, so what about the messenger himself, what he'd look like? I couldn't see much and obviously I didn't get too close when I entered his mind, but he looked a lot like the Unbu. Fuck, Naruto whispered, eyes widening. Admittedly, he was not the most brilliant of people, but he could connect the dots. An Unbu, meeting Tsunade alone, making that kind of offer. It screamed unity. What is it? Ino asked, startled, blinking. Unity, Naruto said, glancing between them. Then seeing the lack of response, explained it started just before our tune-in exams. The daimyo was making a state visit of the country, and he was hanging out in Idioto where this group called Unity tried to assassinate him. So that's why you were so alert in Idioto, Shino said. Yeah, so anyway, Unity is made up of mostly Unbu with some normal jonin. Other than that, the only thing I know about them is that they recognize each other by a hand sign. What hand sign? A basic variation on the all-together sign, Naruto supplied, demonstrating briefly, quoting Anko exactly. Most hand signs are common sense, used in small squads. So of course, Unity would use a common one, who would notice a slight variation. This isn't good, Ino said after a moment, chewing her fingernail Unbu and Jonin. If Tsunade Basin turned them down and they really are going to try and kill her, how are we supposed to stop them? We allow them ambush us. Shino answered that is the best strategy, considering the various unknown factors. Say where? Ino asked, eyes wide. Shinobi Rule 59, Shino explained softly, a true shinobi can turn any ambush or trap against the one who initiated it. Ino said, turning to Naruto, smirking. So what's the plan? Naruto crossed his arms, thinking deeply for several long minutes on the situation. Those guys were going to be going after Tsunade, but she was a Sanin, so she could probably handle it. However, knowing what little he did of Unbu, her age, and the fact that she was related to Ino, it would be best not to risk her life. Okay, Naruto said, finally grinning, this is what we'll do. Hoku watched in silence as the group, located in a small clearing just off the main road, finished their lunch and set out once more, the undercurrents obvious to his well-trained eye. The aim was walking point, but obviously focusing inward too much. The target was walking with a glacial silence, glaring at the orange-clad boy who was bickering with the blonde girl wearing the sword. They were all oblivious to the shadow following them, preparing to cut off their retreat when the ambush occurred. They were about 5 miles out from the city, and as predicted, they were taking routes not normally traveled, where sources of water were far less plentiful. It was a shame they did not know that there had been an isolated storm ahead last night. Following silently, Hoku felt disappointed by Tsunade's decision. She had a good heart and it was a shame they would have to kill her now. As a medic, Tsunade would have been invaluable to Konoha in the upcoming turmoil, and if it were up to him, Hoku would try to reason with her. It wasn't up to him though, so it would be a shame when Zabuza killed her, but she really had left them with no other choice. Sensing something moving swiftly at him from ahead, Hoku dropped back and then dodged further out of range to avoid a swarm of bugs on patrol. Apparently, the aim wasn't quite as inattentive as he had first thought. Still, the bugs retreated and Hoku moved back into better position. Glancing at the team, he smiled behind his mask, seeing the others sending silent but obvious signals to each other. So they were suspicious. Good. They really were ninja then. Not that it would matter. Ahead he could see the marker Zabuza-sama had placed for him. The ambush would start in a few moments. Zabuza would attack from ahead and Hoku would cut off the retreat. They would be dead and Hoku could continue helping Zabuza-sama. Readying his needles, the fiend came to a stop high in a tree and crouched on the tree branch. It would be any moment now, and he selected his target point for Tsunade and the blonde girl closet to her. He silently offered a prayer of remorse to the gods, and promised to end things peacefully for both of them. The Janes in the neck would be best, easiest to hit and the quickest to end things. Ino could feel her nerves screaming at her, accurately aware of the ninja that had been trailing them stopping. The jaws of the ambush were closing and it was taking all of her training to continuing acting normal. Ino just hoped that this plan wouldn't blow up in their faces. After all, it was counting a lot on their just being too ninja and their overconfidence. Still, it was Naruto and he came up with good plans. Though Ino in this case had doubts about the logic of this one, Ino would be responsible for handling Hoku, while Naruto and Shino handled Zabuza. Even with Naruto's explanation about taking Tsunade's criticism with a grain of salt, since the guy they had fought was an A-rank missing ninja, having her famous aunt badmouthing her skills was not conducive to her confidence. Ino was bolted out of her thoughts as she felt Tsunade grab the back of her outfit and pull her back as a massive blade spiraled through the air. Ino watched the arc of the blade, surprised at speed it was traveling. Then, with a resounding thud, it sunk into a thick tree, and a moment later a tall man wearing only loose pants and heavy books landed on the handle. Zabuza. With a simple hop he flipped backward, pulling the sword free as he descended. Landing, he turned the massive weapon coming around to rest casually across his beret shoulders, staring at them with cold eyes from over the bandages around the lower half of his face. Ino couldn't help but feel a tiny shiver as she realized this man was a killer through and through. "Tsune," the man said in a cold, unrefined voice, "how nice to finally met you. Oi, are you Momoki Zabuza, of the Kiri no Shinobi Katana Nananin Shu?" Naruto asked, moving between the group to try and stare down the man. "Hey, well informed to a ninja wannabe ho," the killer said, his attention shifting to Naruto. "By the way, that's a nice trick with the bunshine there." Naruto tensed, and Ino felt a wave of killer intent from Naruto wash over her. The Kenbutsu user couldn't help but shiver. She hated the feeling it gave her around Naruto. Still, further thoughts were cast aside as a flurry of darts started toward her, and Ino reacted without thinking. Her sword clearing the scabbard, deflecting them expertly, and then shifting her grip to a two-handed hold, Ino darted into the trees. The boy in question, wearing a mask with a stylized flame, moved back in response, while throwing more sebum needles, but Ino's kodachi gracefully deflected them. A moment later she reached the tree line and hurtled up the branches toward him. Now that she moving, in the thick of battle, there was no more doubt. Reaching the same branch as her attacker, she made a quick thrust at his mask, but he dodged back, a kunai appearing in hand. Following nimbly, Ino gave chase, driving him back, her kodachi scraping against the kunai repeatedly. Then suddenly Haku stopped retreating and went on the offensive. Ino brought her kodachi around, knocking his attack aside. It was a testimony to the skill of both, when they spun in unison on the branch and came back around for another exchange. Ino lunged forward, blade aimed at his stomach, but had it deflected to the side. Haku followed that up by making his own slash at her face, forcing Ino to bend back, allowing the kunai to pass inches from her face. Regaining her proper posture, Ino whipped her sword around in an attempt to slice the boy in half. Instead, Haku nimble jumped off the branch, rebounding off a series of branches heading for the ground. Cursing, Ino jumped off the branch, channeling chakra into her sword, reinforcing it as she brought it overhead. Haku reached the ground a second before her, and then looked up, raising his kunai to block her blow. Ino smirked and yelled, the kodachi beginning its downward arc. Haku seemed to realize the danger and dodged back at the last second, a shrill shearing noise followed by a deep rumble filling the air. Standing from her crouched position, Ino felt slightly lightheaded, but couldn't stop her grin. At her feet was a sliced in half kunai and a deep gouge, from where her sword had bit into the ground. Looking up, she found the masked boy standing perfectly still, his attention focused on her completely. Slowly, carefully, he produced a new kunai, head tilting slightly as if giving her serious thought. That was when Ino felt the first rush of excitement. Someone was finally taking her as a serious threat. Somebody was afraid of her, Yamanaka Ino. Slipping her left foot back, settling her weight evenly, she raised her kodachi edge up along the side of her cheek. A brief serve of chakra to her legs, she shot forward, a sharp thrust toward Haku's mask. The kunai came up, scraping against the blade, before locking against the hand guard and blade. Dropping her weight slightly, Ino shoved him back, eyes narrowing in concentration. Haku darted forward, a rapid series of exchanges in a matter of moments, leaving Ino almost overwhelmed. Was it her, or was the guy getting faster? Lunging for his stomach, the boy managed to sidestep her blade and counter with a kick to her right knee. Ino went with the momentum and rolled to her feet, before twisting around her kodachi, deflecting the kunai. Regaining her feet, slipping her left foot back and holding the blade angled toward this solar plexus, Ino waited for his next move. Haku was fast as Sasuke, easily, maybe even faster. The boy darted forward once more, another kunai in hand, but Ino deflected the weapon aside, and then down, before side-kicking him in the head. Haku flipped back from the blow, but managed to plant a hand on the ground and flip around to rebound off a tree and land in crouching stance. Ino almost growled in frustration. This was getting nowhere fast. He had her beat in speed, but her skill neutralized it, a standoff. Then Haku shot forward, two kunai in hand this time. Ino pulled her kodachi around quickly, slashing at his midsection only to have him hook his right blade under hers while spinning to his right. The obvious thing, if Ino had been weaker or undertrained, would be for her release the weapon. Instead, she spun with the momentum, the kodachi escaping the kunai, allowing her to spin around and catch his free wrist. Her Kodachi coming back around, INO prepared to make an attack, but had to dodge back as the second kunai came back toward her ribs. A few simply acrobatics moved her out of the path of the two kunai as they came at her before skidding to a halt. Looking up, INO stared at her opponent, surprised to find him breathing heavy. A rush of pride flooded through her. She was handling this, she was equal to an unbu. Then it was shattered when the boy spoke. You are very talented. However, I am afraid you are unable to defeat me. Ho. INO asked, a sense of dread filling her. It rained in this area last night. Hoku said calmly before flashing through a series of one-handed seals. Moments later, a hail of razor-sharp needles made of water assaulted INO, prompting her to channel chakra along her blade and unleash a tornado to scatter the needles. The boy was undaunted, however, as he began forming more one-handed seals. Even more water took to the air, taking the shape of several large mirrors as they surrounded INO. Eyes wide, INO felt her dread growing. This was not a good development. Then, much to her growing distaste, the ninja stepped backward, melting into a mirror. Oh, you've got to be kidding me. Dodging the massive sword, Shino found himself in the hands of a cave bunshine, who tossed him into the air. Flipping, Shino sailed clear of Zabuza and his weapon, before landing heavily in front of a Mizu bunshine of Zabuza. Thankfully, he managed to create a spear of his bugs and send it through the man's head, creating a spray of water, and thus reducing the number of Zabuzas down to 1. Turning, the aim spotted Naruto and his few remaining cave bunshine trying to hurt the man. After INO had taken off after Hoku, things had degenerated. First, it had been semi-even between himself and Naruto. Jade been pushing Zabuza. And then the man had created those Mizu bunshine, which thankfully had been weaker than normal due to the lack of water. Still, the plan had fallen apart, and Shino would be more hindrance than help in a direct assault on the sword-wielding ninja, not that Naruto seemed to care. The blonde was throwing all sorts of wind jutsu at the man, taijutsu combinations, and even a few underhanded tricks. The sad truth was that no matter how much Naruto tried, Zabuza always managed to scrap through with as little damage as possible. Suddenly, Zabuza brought his sword around, slicing the last few cave bunshine down and coming within inches of gutting Naruto, but Shino's bugs moved on their own and formed a Kaikai bunshine to absorb the blow and allow Naruto to retreat. Maybe Shino couldn't actively help with the fight, but he could cover Naruto as best he could. As the orange-clad ninja regrouped and made yet more cave bunshine, Shino silently guided his Kaikai to key locations on the man's body, replacing those already present. Shino had devised the tactic after the start of the fight, in an attempt to drain as much of the man's chakra as he could. So far, the man had seemed unaware of the drain, but Shino had a limited amount of Kaikai left unaffected from the exposure to the water. Zabuza seemed to be growing more agitated as Naruto and his clones resumed the fight, and with a sudden blur of movement, the clones disappeared in puffs of smoke and Naruto crashed to the ground at Shino's feet from a kick to the face. Shino, however, was eyeing the man who had struck a weird pose while glaring at them. It seemed to take a matter of seconds before the air was thick with a mist from nowhere. Fan out! Naruto shouted, leaping to his feet, his breathing abnormally loud in the sudden hush, blood trailing from his mouth and scalp. 8 choices, a disembodied voice whispered from nowhere, while Shino strained to see. Kidneys, heart, liver, lungs, spine, clavicle, vein, neck, vein, brain. Shino frowned behind his high collar, wondering what he could do. His bugs wouldn't be able to notice anything in time, and he couldn't dissipate the mist, it was laced too heavily with chakra. Even Naruto's wind would has a hard time, and he made a motion to the on-edge boy not to try what he was obviously thinking about. You guys aren't bad, Zabuza taunted, still hidden in the mist, but I'm the demon of the mist, expert in silent killing. You're an eyebrow-less freak. Naruto shouted, heatedly, and hands coming together, unleashed a surprisingly strong blast of wind. It actually swirled the mist and forced it to part, at least within close vicinity of them. Shino spotted it first and, grabbing Naruto, yanked him down, as Zabuza's massive sword slashed through the space they had both just occupied, and then his world blurred, almost making him retch as a sunshine carried them further away from the man. Coming out of it, he found Naruto kneeling next to him, bleeding and glaring. Looking at Zabuza, who sported little more than a few shallow cuts, Shino realized just how matched they were. You're fast, ain't you? Zabuza said, sword coming to rest on his shoulder, but I'm going to kill you. Hey! Naruto shouted indignantly as he suddenly charged, 50 cave bunshine emerging from thin air, and began throwing explosive kunai. That's our plan. Ino knew when she had first seen Haku's trick with the mirrors to expect the worst. However, she still had no way of preparing for the assault that had followed. The numerous Hakus had lifted their hands, holding senbon needles, and suddenly the air was full flying weapons. They were moving at a speed that Ino could only register shadows of movement, and it took all of her skill to deflect the ones aimed at her vital points. That had been the pattern for the last few minutes, her continuously deflecting the needles, praying for a moment's break, wondering how in the hell this technique worked. Then suddenly there was a lull in the assault and the boy stared down at her from all sides, giving her the chance to attack. Ino took it and channeled the chakra along her sword, hurling a tornado toward the mirrors. Sadly it failed to have the desired result. Her chakra was too low to do any damage to the mirrors, and she realized how stupid she had been for using so many powerful moves early in the fight. Her only option now was to figure out the secret to this jutsu and then kill the boy. A hail of needles came at her from all sides, but Ino nimbly deflected them while watching the reflections in the mirrors, knowing Haku had to be changing mirrors rapidly, since that was the only explanation. Trying to follow me with your eyes, you will never be able to cope, the boy said from over the mirror overhead, while the numerous reflections lifted their senbon needles in sync. How the hell are you moving so fast? Ino shouted, deflecting the incoming attack, desperately seeking the chance to attack but not finding it. This jutsu is unique to me, Haku admitted, pausing once more. I used the mirror's reflection to travel to me. You appeared to be moving in slow motion. Ino felt her breath hitch, her eyes widen. The way he had said that unique to me, the way he described the move, it sounded like an advanced bloodline of some sort. Her hopes of overcoming it suddenly seemed to disappear, and then she noticed something. He was talking a lot more and the mirror she had attacked was still cracked. That raised a red flag in her mind, common sense suddenly screaming at her. With the small amount of water that would be available from the rain last night, he had to be using an ungodly amount of chakra to hold it all together. She could outlast him, if she did as Kakashi had taught her through the Chunin exams, and relied on her sixth sense to survive. Still, Haku traveled at unbelievable speeds. He was actually attacking from all sides at once. After all, Minus and Ino was hard-pressed to defend herself. Not that Ino could or would give up, but the fact was she was helpless. Her chakra was low, her stamina was not enough to get her through this, and her blade was slowing just a little bit from fatigue. Deflecting a flurry of needles as best she could, Ino could feel the early signs of exhaustion setting in. He paused to talk again, and Ino frantically applied her mind to the problem, desperate for a solution. The mirrors were obviously beyond her ability to destroy with her low chakra. Defending was getting her nowhere, except dead slowly. He moved too fast to her to disrupt his attack, but her only option was just that. Killing him while he attacked her, but the problem was how. Then she remembered the jutsu Naruto had taught her yesterday, a jutsu she had mastered by killing his cave Bunshine with a massive heart attack. A jutsu forever linked to the look of surprise on his face as he died. Kanashibari no jutsu was her only choice, but there was still one last problem: how to slow Haku down long enough to hit him with it. A moment later, Shinobi Rule 58 flashed through her mind, and Ino knew the answer. Victory sometimes comes through defeat. An unnatural calm stole through Ino. She knew how to win now, it was just a matter of keeping it from looking obvious. Dodging instead of deflecting the next hail of weapons, Ino made a lunge to the mirror the boy was in. It was serious gamble on her part, her reflexes against his accuracy and speed. The senbon needle struck her dead to rights in the chest, and she backknifed from the blow to land spread eagle on the ground. There was a moment of silence, and then sound of the mirrors cracking before they shattered. The sound of feet connecting with the ground filled the damp air. You never had a hope of defeating me. Your kenbutsu could not destroy my ice, and you could not move fast enough to catch me. A second later he jerked in surprise, his body folding from an unseen impact of chakra, while Ino had managed to sit up quickly. Breathing heavily, using an arm to support her, she watched as he stumbled back, before collapsing with a dull thump. Gathering her energy, Ino carefully regained her feet and stood stooped shoulder for a moment, then retrieved the kodachi she had dropped in that last attack. Pausing, she straightened up, then grasping the senbon pulled it free with a soft grunt. Looking at the blood-covered needle, she tossed it aside, grimacing in pain as she sheathed her sword. Okay, so that was not the most brilliant idea she'd ever had, but at least she was alive. Thankfully her reflexes had been better than his speed and accuracy, allowing her to twist her body just enough to avoid taking a serious hit, but from the feel of it she'd cut it awfully close. Even more thankfully, The bandages around her upper body had absorbed some of the blow. Feeling a moment of pride, she looked at now dead boy and grimaced, but still she was proud this had not been an easy fight for her. Still, INO had to say it because now that the fight for her life was over she couldn't help it. You talked too damn much like Sasuke, by the way. After another moment she turned, heading back toward the rest of her team. Naruto shot in, ducking the massive blade as it swept overhead and spun around with a hammer fist toward the man's ribs. Sadly, it was like trying to fight Anko. This bastard could react faster than Naruto could attack. Zabuza stepped back and dropped his sword in a sharp chop. Naruto quickly threw himself into a left shoulder roll and sprang to his feet as two clones grabbed and threw him completely to safety. Landing, he spun, the clones buying time as best they could. This fight was not going well and Naruto knew it. He should have been able to handle this. Instead, Zabuza was tearing him to shreds, slowly, and Naruto was beginning to doubt his own skill. He quickly banished that after all Zabuza, while powerful, was still taking some damage. It was just that in comparison Naruto was taking the worst of it all, and that grated against the boy worse than anything, and he was determined to change things. Raising his fingers, Naruto created a few hundred cave bunshine and sent them after the guy, who seemed to be growing more pissed off with each passing second. Glancing left, he spotted Shino, who was silently guiding a wave of kaikai to attack the man from behind. Seeing his teammate, Naruto thought about INO and wondered if she had managed to win against her enemy or not. Creating another cave bunshine, he sent it on its way to find out, his heart almost in his throat at the thought of her lying dead in the forest. No, not INO, and not on his watch. This fight ended now. Naruto returned to the fight with renewed vigor. It was sheer chaos, weaving and dancing his way through the cave bunshine, using them as cover and distraction. Explosive notes were going off right and left, massive amounts of exploding kunai and shuriken, and it all proved utterly pointless as Zabuza finally got a bead on him and swung that massive weapon around to take his head off, destroying several cave bunshine in the process. Naruto ducked under the blow, much to Zabuza's obvious confusion, then sliced a kunai across his stomach. The missing ninja grunted at that, lashing out, but Naruto dodged that as well and drove the kunai into the shoulder at an angle. Zabuza actually yowled in pain, but pivoted, catching Naruto alongside the head with a knee that sent him tumbling away. Face-livid, Naruto regained his feet with a sway and turned, dismayed that the man was ripping the kunai out of his shoulder with a demonic ferocity. Still, that should at least slow the damn sword down a little bit. A moment later Naruto dodged the kunai by hair's breadth, followed by the massive weapon that came around faster than ever. Shino came to the rescue with a massive spear of bugs that clashed against the blunt side of the sword and gave Naruto time to put some space between him and Zabuza. Kami, the guy should have been slower or more reserved. He was wounded after all, but instead the guy just got more enraged. A cave bunshine tackled Zabuza from behind, but he elbowed it in the face, then chopped another two in half, and kicked another in the face. Naruto, my Kaikai has drained as much chakra as we could from this man, Shino said, moving to stand beside him, his voice strained and his shoulders sagging. Perhaps now would be a good time to retreat. Can't, Naruto panted, trying to blink blood out of his eye. He'll just come after us. I got to finish this here and now. I already got one psychopathic sword user after me. Naruto was only vaguely aware of Shino retreating, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered other than the simple fact that Naruto had finally decided to kill his enemy. He even had a plan, and it was amazing how simple everything became when he focused entirely on killing his enemy. In unison the various cave bunshine disappeared, and Zabuza turned to stare him down. A moment of understanding seemed to pass between them. No more games, no more dancing around it. It was time to get down the serious business of killing each other. Zabuza spun his sword quickly and drove it into the ground, his fingers beginning to form a rapid and long string of hand seals. Naruto gathered as much chakra as he could and formed a Tora seal. Suten Suiryuden no Jutsu. Zabuza shouted, the air around him rippling before the moisture exploded and joined into a massive column of water in the form of a dragon hurling at him. Futon de Topper. Naruto roared the now dry wind before swirling with an ear-splitting roar as it clashed against the other technique. The clash of techniques raved for a moment before the wind tore through the water dragon, forcing Zabuza to use his sword as an anchor. Still the man and weapon slid several feet, leaving a deep gouge in the earth. It was hardly over as Zabuza yanked his sword free and spun it before bringing it down, the air rippling before a spiraling blast of water shot out once more. Naruto met this too, with his wind, using the Kase no Yaiba. As the two techniques clashed, decimating much of the surrounding area, Zabuza shot forward. Naruto quickly created another Kase no Yaiba, which Zabuza defended against by using his sword as a shield, which resulted in little more than the sword being sliced deeply several times. It was not enough, however, to deter the man who reached Naruto in a matter of seconds, his sword coming around swiftly. Naruto dodged back, a second too slow, his arm receiving an ugly cut from the tip of the blade. Swearing, Naruto preformed a shunshine backward and skidded to a halt, glaring at his attacker. Producing a kunai in each hand, Naruto shot forward with a series of shunshines attacking from every direction. Metal rang against metal as Zabuza defended against his onslaught, until Naruto found his opening and, using the heavy style, ducked a slash at his head and came up on the inside of the man's guard. A kunai to the ribs, too shallow to kill. Naruto planted a foot against the man's leg and jumped backward into the air, avoiding the retaliation. Twisting, Naruto came around, sending not only the last kunai he was holding, but the one strapped to his forearm heading for the man. They were deflected deftly with the massive sword, but that was fine. Landing with a flip, Naruto sprang away, and then rebounded from a tree, charging back at the man. Zabuza spun his weapon overhead, then brought it down sharply before him and charged as well. They met halfway between them. Zabuza made his thrust and Naruto, using the heavy, dodged, attacking from his left side with a jumping punch to the face. It connected, but only as a glancing blow, and Naruto had to grab the man's head with his hand and hurl himself over. Landing, he shot away with a shunshine and pivoted, turning to face the man. Despite appearances, this guy was freaking strong and he could take some serious damage. Naruto could too, of course. His arm was burning slightly, but he knew without looking that the cut was healing rapidly. Then he noticed that the man was resting his massive sword across his shoulders, staring at him in a way that did not bode well in Naruto's opinion. That was when Naruto looked down to discover his jacket was almost completely ruined. Apparently, he had been slightly off in his dodging of that weapon. The entire right side of his jacket was now gutted. That wasn't what got him though. The orange material was darker than it should have been, which meant that Naruto was bleeding. Nothing life-threatening, to him at least, but Naruto would have sworn he had dodged that weapon completely. Looking back up, he narrowed his eyes on his opponent, who started laughing in a tone that sent a chill even up Naruto's spine. Fury overtook him though, and he clenched his fists, knuckles popping loudly in the air. "What the hell are you laughing at, you freak?" "Nothing," Zabuza said snidely, the sword coming around to point at Naruto steadily. "It's just that you seem to has a bloodline like Haku. It's been a long time since I've had to fight a bloodline, so I'm laughing for not seeing it sooner." "Hey," Naruto said while silently preparing to attack at the first opportunity. "I'm Uzumaki Naruto, the future Hokage, not a bloodline. You can worry about being Hokage after you survive," Zabuza said before disappearing from view in a blur of speed. Naruto felt his instincts scream at him, and he dropped to the ground as the massive sword slashed overhead from behind him. Using his hands, Naruto spun over, planting a kick firmly to the man's chin and then performing a backflip, another to his chin. Landing smoothly, Naruto served his chakra and leapt back as the massive blade swung around to speed that was near invisible. Zabuza was on the offensive once more, and before long Naruto was doing his damnedest to avoid getting any more cuts. Still, no matter how much he hurt this eyebrow-less freak, it didn't slow him down. Naruto was also aware that their height and weight made a difference as well. Naruto's blows were just a tad lighter than they should be because of it. If he had been fighting anyone remotely near his own height, he should have been able to do much more serious damage. That kick to the shin, he knew, would have laid out Kiba, but with Zabuza, it was little more than a tickle apparently. Sidestepping a particularly brutal downward chop, Naruto prepared to launch a counterattack, only to catch a front kick to the solar plexus, which drove the air out of his lungs and launched him backwards. Luckily, Anko had hit him there before several times, so he learned quickly how to focus through the air and lack of air. Hence, instead of being a helpless target, he rolled with the momentum when he hit the ground and sprang to his feet, his breath already returning in sharp stabs. Zabuza thankfully was caught up trying to avoid a sudden massive wave of bugs. Naruto felt a flash of annoyance toward Shino for interfering, but instead took the time to begin forming his Rasengan. One hand to supply the chakra, the other rapidly striking it to give it form, and then looking up, he fixed his gaze on his enemy, who was turning to face him. Naruto let a low growl escape as he started forward in a stumbling but dead run, bringing his arm with the Rasengan back, his concentration at its zenith. Zabuza waited until Naruto was within range and then twirled his massive sword overhead, before bringing it down in a vicious and powerful downward chop. It was a feat that Naruto was not conscious of doing, but suddenly realizing he could not move fast enough to avoid the blow, he performed a shunshine to reach inside the man's guard before he could complete the motion. Zabuza's eyes went wide. Naruto appeared in a crouch, snarling as he drove his Rasengan forward into the swordsman's sternum. The air filled with the sound of rushing wind, cracking bones, and then a meaty tearing. Blood splattered Naruto's face as the man lifted off his feet, sword falling uselessly aside, and was sent hurtling 50 feet away into a massive tree that snapped from the impact. Zabuza's body arched from the blow. The man stood erect for a moment, and then collapsed lifelessly face first to the ground. Naruto slowly stood up from the crouch, arm falling absently to his side. Taking a deep breath, he let it out, and turned to find Shino approaching cautiously, and it took Naruto a moment to force his bloodlust aside and offer a faint smile to the boy. "I didn't need your help." "That was," Shino started uncertain, then shook his head. "Kikyo-chan acted on her own. She says that she thought it best to help you out since we are all on the same team." Naruto managed a grunt, said, not knowing really what to make of that. He knew that Keiko was a bug that Shino spoke with a lot. It was just something that came up among them, but this was the first time he'd heard of her having an actual personality. Well, he did suppose that if she could talk then she would has a personality, but still. "Well, thanks Kikyo-chan." "She says you are welcome," Shino said in that monotone way of his. "Oi, so what did you think of that move?" "I can't wait to tell Iro Sennin that I used it to take down an A-rank missing nin." Naruto gloated, leading the way to the dead body where he began searching for items. "It was impressive," Shino admitted. "The amount of concentration had to be very high. I am also impressed that you managed to use a shunshine in conjuncture with such a move. However, you seem far too carefree after such a battle." "Whatever," Naruto muttered, pocketing the money on the man along with a few notes and one sealed scroll. Then, after some deliberation, he took the scratched forehead protector. "We should move to locate INO and then return to Otafuki-gai," Shino said. "By now, Tsunade-sama will have spent all of our money and be preparing to leave soon." "Right," Naruto said, looking at the body before creating several cave bunshine. "Naruto. Even an eyebrowless freak deserves to be buried," Naruto muttered and then walked over to the massive sword, considering it. The blade had survived the K's no Yaba. Yes, there were deep cuts on the outer edges, but to the most part it was untouched. Kneeling, he produced a sealing scroll that he had left over from training with Iro Sennin along with his pen and the chakra-laced ink. A few deft movements later to mark both the scroll and weapon, and Naruto was ready. Channeling the chakra into his hand, he placed it on the scroll, activating the seal. Onaya Fuuinhaoin. There was a pulse as the seals on the scroll and the sword glowed. Then with a gentle glow, the sealing was complete and Naruto was binding the scroll, carrying the sword shut. Standing, he pocketed it and grinned at Shino. "Now let's go met up with Ino-chan." Tsunade frowned, dropping her coins into the machine and yanking the arm. The Sannin watched the wheels spin for a moment, then looked around the parlor. It was well lit, giving the decor a nice warm look, complementing the polished wooden panels and the strikingly colorful paintings on the wall. The place was new, or at least it was new since the last time Tsunade had been through town, and packed. Large, brightly painted machines lined every available surface along with small tables, and the room was crammed with people at the machines shouting in victory, cursing in defeat, and employing odd body language in an attempt to win. It was the kind of place that not too long ago, Tsunade would have enjoyed even if she did lose the shirt off her back, which had happened only once when she had foolishly agreed to play strip poker with Freya and Orochimaru when they were younger minus. Now though she found it rather boring and the medic wasn't sure why. It could have been the lack of Shizune or Tonton. Maybe it was because she was now responsible for taking care of people and didn't have the energy to be selfish. Most likely, it was because she was still held, the necklace and the guilt associated with it. She hadn't been able to confront Naruto. She had been surrounded with cave bunshine all day after all. Nicely created and very convincing cave bunshine of Shino, Ino and Naruto, but Tsunade was a Sannin. She wasn't sure why Naruto would do such a thing. Even to avoid her, it seemed stupid to replace all of them, and the only thing she could figure was they were training. Looking back at her machine, she sighed, another loser. She checked the Ryu the cave bunshine had given her to the chance to apologize for messing up. She found it gone. Just as well, the beautiful woman decided they needed to get on the road and head to Crater City and then get back to Konoha. Getting up, she started for the entrance, only to pause at the sound of someone hitting the jackpot. Eye twitching, she turned to find some wrinkly old hag sitting at her machine, money pouring out into the tray. Her first instinct was to explode and take the money, but she restrained herself seeing the old hag share kiss with an equally wrinkled old bastard. Snorting in annoyance, the legendary sucker left cursing her continued bad luck. Sometimes she really did believe that if wasn't for her bad luck, she wouldn't has any luck at all. The sun made her squint. She had spent too much time indoors gambling, but she kept walking back toward the inn. The cave bunshine had promised to wait there for her, since they didn't want to ruin her fun. Sinead figured that way the real Team 10 could change with their counterparts quickly, hopefully without letting her know they had ever been gone. The only reason she had allowed the fast to keep going, besides blowing all of their money gambling, was the fact that she kept expecting that boy from last night and his partner to come after her. The longer those three were out of her way, the easier things would be for her to deal with when the fight happened. Sadly, neither had shown up all day and she had decided to gamble while waiting. Clearing the gambling district, she turned left and headed down the road to Hoenn. The people of this city had truly been ingenious in the layout. The gambling district and the pleasure district surrounded the inns and normal shopping area. Sinead could remember Ino's reaction when they had wandered from the weapons shop and into the pleasure area. It had been priceless to see the girl's face turn bright red and her eyes to grow as big as saucers. Shino hadn't reacted, which had made Sinead wonder if maybe he wasn't gay. Then she considered the fact that there had been enough flesh for both male and female to enjoy, so she considered the possibility that he just wasn't interested in sex, period. The most obvious answer, though, was that he was an abaim and hence showed very little reaction to much of anything, including attractive women offering him good times to discounted rates. Reaching the inn, Sinead paused, finding the three ninja already waiting for her. Naruto's hair had reddish tinge to it, his jacket almost in tatters. Ino stood nearby, her top darkened around a tiny hole near her chest, but there was no mistaking her confident look. Only Shino appeared no different. Approaching the three, wondering what had happened, because there was no way any of that was from a training session. "Hey Baba," Naruto said, his voice bright as he held up a scratched mist forehead protector Momoki Zabuza. A rank missing nin. Demon of the Mist. Member of the Kirino Shinobi Katana Nananin Shu. Dead. Sinead blinked then as the full knowledge of what he was telling her sank in. She felt her eyes widen. These three had killed Zabuza. The Demon of the Mist. No way, no fucking way, but the evidence seemed to support the story and she could only stare at them in silence before recovering. "What? Are you expecting a parade?" "No," Naruto said, ignoring her biting sarcasm as he put the forehead protector up. "Just letting you know." "Whatever," Sinead mumbled, then staring at him for another moment tossed the necklace at him. He caught it, of course, startled, and then his eyes darkened slightly. "What are you minus?" "Shut up and listen," Sinead said curtly, cutting him off. "I'm over 50 years old. I've survived 2 wars, lost friends and family, some because of my own mistakes. I'm not going to change my opinion about heroes or Hokages." Oba-san minus Ino started to object before Tsunade's held a finger up to silence her. However, Tsunade said, her gaze not wavering from Naruto's, "That necklace doesn't belong to me. Not anymore. It's a curse you inherited from the previous Hokages and 2 heroes. For better or worse, it's yours." "Ho?" Naruto asked blankly. "All of them," Tsunade said, her tone growing sad. "Were just like you. That's why that cursed necklace belongs to you now, why it's your curse. When you die, it goes with you." Tsunade saw the understanding in his gaze, the appreciation, and she snorted, pushing past them silently. The others followed, and suddenly Tsunade wished she had more money and a few more hours to kill in the gambling district. "Yeah. Ramen." Naruto cheered as they came within sight of the village gates. Ino smiled slightly, but otherwise ignored her teammate, much as Shino did. Tsunade pinched the bridge of her nose and shouted for him to shut the hell up. "Oi! Why don't you shut up, Baba?" Naruto countered, looking at her with a bright smile, the necklace she had given him around his neck. "What did you call me?" Tsunade grated out, left eye twitching. "Sorry," Naruto said mockingly, "I forgot how old you were. I called you Baba." "Runt." Tsunade shouted back, smashing a fist into the ground, where he had been standing a split second before. "I'm going to kill you." "You are," Naruto taunted, while Ino and Shino sighed off to the side before nearly being turned into a pincushion from a hail of kunai. Naruto. Whipping around, the blood drained from his face as he spotted the fearsome woman known as Anko. "Hey, Anko." Naruto gulped, eyes widening. We need to has a little talk, Anko said sweetly, twirling a kunai around a finger, about you making this village think I would run around naked shouting that I love people. It was just a joke, Naruto said, effing away from her. A joke? Anko asked sweetly to be safe. You had a naked clone of me make out with Kurenai in public. Naruto suddenly bolted amid a hail of sharp, deadly weapons, the insane woman known as Anko chasing after him. That's it to this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe to the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlist. Hope you would like them too.